Hello there, and welcome to our channel, where curiosity settles in quietly and science arrives without hurry. Tonight, we're easing into a question that feels both ancient and strangely personal. A question that sits somewhere between geology and the stories people once whispered around firelight. We're going to explore what might happen if volcanoes, those enormous engines of pressure and heat, have been holding on to clues about some of Earth's earliest civilizations. Not in the dramatic treasure-hunting way movies like to imagine, but in a slower, more grounded sense. In the way nature sometimes stores information without meaning to, like a keepsake pressed into a book and forgotten until someone opens the pages again. Before we begin wandering through the landscapes shaped by ash, molten rock, and long-buried clues, I'd like to know something simple. Where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? I always find it grounding to remember that each person arrives here from a different part of the world. Each of us listening under a different patch of sky. Some close to sleep, others at the start of a long evening. It creates a small sense of company, even though we're all scattered across continents and coastlines. If you find tonight's slow journey interesting or comforting, or if it helps you unwind at the end of a long day, I'd be grateful if you'd like the video or subscribe. It helps this quiet space reach others who might enjoy drifting through science at a gentle pace. No rush, no pressure, just an open invitation if it feels right for you. Now, let's ease into the story, not with an explosion or a dramatic rush of molten rock, but with a moment of stillness. Because volcanoes, for all their reputation as destructive forces, spend most of their lives doing nothing more than sitting beneath the sky waiting. Sometimes for decades, sometimes for centuries. And during that waiting, they are not just silent mountains. They are archives. They collect layers of landscape. They trap evidence. They bury entire environments under blankets of ash that can protect objects from decay better than almost anything else on Earth. In a strange way, their destructive force becomes the reason certain details survive. Think about a landscape thousands of years ago. People living near a mountain, because mountains often mean fertile soil, fresh water, and stable ground. They build homes, carve tools, raise families, and form traditions shaped by the predictable patterns of the seasons. They are not thinking of themselves as ancient. They are simply living. And nearby is a volcano that has not erupted in anyone's memory. To them, it is just part of the background. A place where clouds gather, a landmark for navigation, a solid, unmoving presence. But deep inside it, pressure builds grain by grain. Heat shifts in chambers far below. Gases move upward. And in the years before an eruption, small signals appear that no one at the time would recognize. A slight change in the water of a nearby spring. A cluster of earthquakes too faint for most people to feel. Animals behaving differently. None of these details would mean much individually. They would simply blend into the routine noise of daily life. Then one day, everything changes. There is noise, ground movement, and the first plume of ash rising above the peak. For those living nearby, the experience would be terrifying. Not because they understood the science, but because the world around them suddenly stopped behaving in familiar ways. The sky darkens faster than a storm would allow. The air fills with particles that sting the eyes. The ground trembles in a way that suggests something powerful moving below the surface. What people did next would depend entirely on their habits, their beliefs, and their sense of safety. Some would leave immediately, guided by instinct. Others might wait, hoping the mountain would calm down. They would not know how much time they had. They would not know the scale of the eruption. They would simply react. And this is where the strange preservation process begins. Ash is light as it falls, but heavy in the way it settles. It covers everything it touches: tools left on the ground, footsteps, entire roofs. And because the material is so fine, it captures detail in ways soil normally can't. It can record the arrangement of objects in a room, the height of a doorway, the texture of woven baskets, even the shape of someone's final movements. It's not preserving on purpose. It's simply covering everything at once, sealing it from air, bacteria, sunlight, and the natural breakdown of organic matter. When we think about volcanoes today, we tend to focus on their power. The images of bright lava flowing down slopes, or fountains of molten rock bursting into the sky. But the real influence volcanoes have on archaeology and history is quieter than that. Long after the eruption ends, long after the heat fades and the ground cools, the layers of ash remain. They do not shift easily. They do not crumble for a long time. This gives them the ability to act like protective blankets, keeping fragile objects safe far longer than they would have survived exposed to the elements. Take the example most people know: Pompeii and Herculaneum, cities preserved beneath Mount Vesuvius. The detail is astonishing, not because those places were unusual, but because the ash froze their final moments in place. Houses kept their layout. Mosaics kept their color. Bread remained in ovens and tools stayed on workbenches. It wasn't the eruption alone that preserved them. It was the combination of heat, volcanic gases, and layers of ash that insulated everything. Without the volcano, those cities would have vanished like so many others from the same period. But instead, they remain snapshots of daily Roman life. Now imagine something similar happening in times far older. Not just in the last few thousand years, but 10,000, 20,000, even 100,000 years ago. People then were skilled and adaptable, building homes from local materials, shaping tools from stone, and forming social systems that work for their environment. Many of these details degas quickly over time, unless they are buried almost instantly. That's where volcanoes come in again. Their ash can halt decay in a single day. Scientists have found footprints preserved in volcanic mud that hardened like cement. They found charcoal from ancient fires, protected beneath layers of trah. They've discovered tools made from obsidian, a volcanic glass, left where people last used them. Over time, these discoveries add up to a picture, not necessarily of a lost civilization in the dramatic sense, but of communities complex enough to leave behind patterns. Patterns that tell us how they lived, what they made, what they believed, and how they adapted to landscapes shaped by eruptions. This raises a natural question. If volcanoes have preserved so much by accident, how much more might they be holding that we haven't uncovered yet? Many volcanic regions remain unstudied simply because the terrain is difficult to reach. Thick forests, unstable slopes, and remote locations make field research challenging. And then there's the fact that many ash layers are hidden beneath younger layers from later eruptions. To find something preserved from an early period, researchers sometimes have to dig through multiple geological time markers, each representing a separate eruption. Imagine uncovering a layer that hasn't been touched for tens of thousands of years. A layer resting exactly where it settled the day it fell. Underneath it might be the outline of a shelter, the imprint of woven fiber, or tools that haven't seen sunlight since long before recorded history. These are the kinds of discoveries that reshape what we think we know about early humans. Not by revealing grand cities or advanced technologies, but by offering clarity on how people lived, moved, and survived. Volcanoes also influence where people choose to settle. The soil around them is often nutrient-rich, making agriculture easier. Water flows from volcanic rock in stable, reliable ways. This means early communities were drawn to the same places that would later be disrupted by eruptions. It creates a cycle: settlement, destruction, regrowth, and new settlement. Each eruption adds another layer to the story. Geological records show periods where large populations lived along volcanic arcs in places like East Africa, the Mediterranean, and Southeast Asia. These areas were not just habitable. They were often ideal for early societies, which means that when eruptions did happen, they sometimes buried entire settlements at once. All of this leads to a gradual understanding that volcanoes are not simply destructive forces. They're contributors to the archaeological record. They shape where people live. They preserve what people leave behind. And they offer a timeline through layers of ash that can be analyzed to determine when each event occurred. As we move deeper into this topic, the questions become more specific. What exactly has been preserved under ancient eruptions? How do scientists decode the information stored in layers of typhra? What kinds of stories can ash reveal that soil alone cannot? And how do these discoveries reshape our understanding of early human societies? When we think about the earliest people who lived near volcanoes, it helps to picture daily life long before the idea of geology or history existed. People did not look at a mountain and categorize it as active, dormant, or extinct. They didn't see fault lines or magma chambers. They didn't recognize patterns in seismic activity or the long buildup that leads to an eruption. To them, the landscape was simply the place they lived. The mountain was as permanent and reliable as the horizon. It was a feature of the land in the same way a river or a coastline was a feature. It offered orientation. It shaped the weather. It broke up the view of the sky. It created a direction to walk toward or walk away from, depending on the day's needs. Across the world, long before written language, people settled near volcanoes for practical reasons. The soil made fertile by older eruptions was rich and productive. Water flowed in reliable paths around volcanic slopes. Vegetation grew in ways that made food gathering easier. Wildlife patterns also formed around these areas. Even without understanding why the land was productive, people recognized the benefits. They built shelters. They established seasonal routes. They developed routines that made survival not just possible, but stable. In these communities, the mountain was not a symbol or a warning. It was part of the environment that supported life. Generations could pass without any volcanic activity. 100 years of stillness would make an eruption seem impossible. The people living there would grow up hearing nothing unusual. No loud booms from deep within the earth. No ground movement that suggested pressure rising. The mountain would look like any other mountain. Its slopes would be covered in grass, shrubs, or forests. Animals would make paths across it. Rain would carve shallow grooves. Snow might settle at the top, if the climate allowed. People built their stories around what they could see and understand. They described the mountain in terms of its size, its shape, or the way clouds gathered around its peak. Some groups gave the mountain a personality simply because humans naturally create meaning in familiar landmarks. The mountain might have been described as old, calm, strong, or watchful. These descriptions weren't meant as formal beliefs. They were everyday observations, shaped into language that made the world feel understandable. Over time, these descriptions could have evolved into shared stories. A parent explaining to a child why the mountain looked a certain way. A group of people imagining what might live inside the slopes. A traveler telling neighbors about an unfamiliar sound heard in the night. None of these early stories were necessarily meant to be myths. They were attempts to process the environment using the tools people had at the time. Curiosity, imagination, and daily experience created a form of early understanding. When the mountain finally did erupt, the experience would have been startling, in a way that is difficult to compare with anything in modern life. Today, eruptions are monitored by experts who track seismic patterns, measure gas emissions, and use satellite data to detect changes in temperature and deformation. People may still be frightened during an eruption, but they have a framework to interpret what is happening. There are authorities who issue warnings, scientists who explain the cause, and systems designed to help people evacuate. The earliest communities had none of this. The first signs of an eruption would have been confusing. A deep noise from within the mountain, a plume of ash rising from the top, the ground shaking in irregular patterns, the sky darkening in ways that didn't match normal weather. People would not have been prepared for any of it. Their routines would have been interrupted instantly. The environment that had always felt stable transformed in minutes or hours into something unpredictable. This sudden change might have created the first stories that connected volcanic activity to meaning, not because people were trying to create legends, but because they needed a way to describe what had happened. An event that destroys a settlement, disrupts the land, and alters the sky demands explanation. People naturally search for causes. They asked each other questions. They tried to understand where the noise came from, why the sky darkened, and why the ground moved. These early attempts at understanding were rooted in observation. People noticed the heat. They noticed the smell of gases. They noticed the way animals fled quickly in the moments before the eruption. They noticed new patterns in the earth after the eruption settled. They saw ash covering the landscape and hiding familiar paths. They saw trees reduced to blackened shapes. They saw water sources filled with sediments. Every change needed some kind of explanation, even if the explanation relied on limited information. Over time, these observations could have become stories passed between generations. Not necessarily dramatic stories, but simple accounts of what happened and why people should be cautious. A parent might tell a child to avoid a certain area because the ground was unstable. A group might choose not to rebuild in the exact location of a destroyed settlement. People might mark the land in subtle ways to avoid the most dangerous spots. These decisions came from practical experience, not from scientific understanding, but they still shaped the long-term relationship people had with volcanic environments. The idea of a volcano having intentions likely came much later. The earlier stories were more practical than symbolic. They described behavior, not purpose. They described situations where living near the mountain was beneficial, and situations where it was dangerous. Over centuries, those practical descriptions may have developed into beliefs about why eruptions happened and what they meant. These beliefs were not mistakes. They were reasonable attempts to explain natural forces without access to scientific tools. Across the world, independent communities developed their own ways of describing volcanic behavior. In some regions, the mountain was seen as a living presence. In others, it was viewed as a boundary between the world of people and the interior of the earth. Some groups interpreted eruptions as warnings. Others saw them as part of a natural cycle of destruction and renewal. These interpretations reflected the experiences of each community. People who lived near frequent eruptions developed different stories than those who lived near dormant volcanoes. This process of interpretation can be observed in archaeological evidence. Excavations near volcanic regions often reveal multiple layers of settlement separated by layers of ash. This suggests that people returned to the same areas even after eruptions destroyed earlier communities. They understood that the land would eventually become fertile again. They recognized patterns of regrowth. They rebuilt sometimes in the same places and sometimes slightly farther from the slopes. Their choices reflect resilience and a practical understanding of long-term benefits. What makes this particularly interesting for modern researchers is that each layer of ash acts as a timestamp. When scientists study these layers, they can identify different eruptions, their scale, and the time periods in which they occurred. This creates a timeline that includes both environmental events and human responses. In some areas, the ash layers show that people rebuilt quickly. In others, the gap between settlements suggests longer periods of abandonment. These patterns help researchers understand how early societies adapted to repeated disruptions. One of the most revealing aspects of these layers is the preservation of everyday objects. Ash can protect delicate materials that would normally decompose quickly. Imprints of baskets, wooden structures, plant fibers, and food remains have been found in layers sealed by volcanic deposits. These finds offer a rare glimpse into daily life. They show what materials people used, how they organized their living spaces, what foods they ate, and what tools they relied on. Without volcanic preservation, much of this detail would be lost. The discovery of preserved footprints adds another dimension to the story. Footprints found in volcanic mud, or ash, can show the size of the group, the direction they were moving, and in some cases, the urgency of their movements. A calm set of footprints suggests routine activity. A scattered pattern suggests rapid movement during an eruption. These details help reconstruct not just the event itself, but the human experience of it. Another significant detail comes from the study of volcanic soils. When researchers analyze the layers beneath and above ancient ash deposits, they can identify long-term environmental changes. They can see when vegetation returned, how quickly the soil regained fertility, and how the ecosystem adapted. These details help explain why people returned to certain volcanic regions even after major eruptions. The soil's productivity made the risks worthwhile. All of these pieces together create a broad picture. People lived near volcanoes because of the advantages the landscape offered. Their daily routines were shaped by the land's stability, not its potential danger. When eruptions happened, the impact was sudden and confusing, creating the need for explanations and stories. These stories eventually became part of the cultural identity of each group. And through the accidental preservation created by volcanic ash, modern researchers can study moments that would normally have vanished completely. When volcanic ash settles over a landscape, it looks at first like a simple blanket of gray powder. It softens edges, hides familiar shapes, and mutes the colors of everything underneath. But what it covers is not erased. It is held in place, preserved in a way that almost nothing else in nature can achieve. This is where the story becomes less about the eruption itself and more about the quiet layers that form after the eruption is over. Those layers contain the traces of people who lived normal lives until the moment the ash arrived. Their routines, their belongings, and the layout of their homes become locked into the earth, waiting for someone thousands of years later to uncover them. The first thing to understand is how ash interacts with the environment. When it falls thick enough, it cuts off oxygen from the objects beneath it. Without oxygen, decay slows dramatically. Wood, fibers, seeds, bones, and even fragile impressions that would normally disappear in weeks can remain intact for centuries. It is not a perfect preservation system, but it is one of the best that nature produces accidentally. In many places around the world, archaeologists rely on volcanic layers as chronological anchors. They help determine not only when an eruption happened, but what life looked like before and after it. Imagine a community living on the slope of a large volcano many thousands of years ago. Their homes may have been made from wood, thatch, mud, or stone. Their tools may have been crafted from bone, rock, or early metals, depending on the time and region. Their daily life included gathering food, caring for children, maintaining shelters, preparing meals, and moving across familiar paths. None of these tasks would have seemed extraordinary to them. They were simply the pattern of life. When the eruption began, their first reaction likely depended on experience. If earlier generations had passed down stories of an eruption, people might have reacted more quickly. If no such memory existed, the reaction may have been slower, shaped by confusion rather than preparedness. The ash that followed did not fall evenly. Some areas received only a thin layer that left little behind. Other areas were covered deeply enough to create a permanent imprint of everything that stood beneath. These thicker deposits are where the most detailed traces of ancient life are found. In some cases, the ash filled rooms and preserved their arrangement. Pots remained where they had been placed. Charcoal from cooking fires stayed in the exact shape of the last flame. Tools on work surfaces remained organized the way someone left them. Even the texture of woven material sometimes appears as a pattern pressed into ash that later hardened. One of the most telling features preserved by volcanic deposits is the arrangement of living spaces. Archaeologists can examine the outlines of walls, the placement of doorways, and the position of fire pits or storage pits. These details reveal how people structured their daily routines, where they prepared food, where they slept, where they stored resources, where they worked. This kind of information is crucial because most early structures were built from organic materials that do not survive long in the open environment. Without volcanic ash, many ancient settlements would leave only scattered stones or fragments that reveal little about how the space was used. With ash, the layout can be reconstructed with surprising precision. Sometimes, the ash preserves even more direct traces of people. Footprints, for example, appear in surprising numbers at volcanic sites. They show the movement of individuals or groups across the landscape in the hours or days before the full eruption. Some footprints show calm walking, as if people were carrying out routine tasks. Others show hurried, irregular steps that suggest people fleeing from danger. The spacing of footprints can reveal height, weight, speed, and even whether someone was carrying a heavy load. Footprints of children sometimes appear alongside those of adults. These details add a human layer to the geological record. They show that behind every eruption were individuals experiencing the event, moment by moment, often with little understanding of what was happening. In certain sites, impressions of plants and food remain visible. Seeds, leaves, and wooden tools create faint outlines that reveal what people used and what they ate. In some cases, food remains buried in ash, provide evidence of meals that were interrupted. A half-paired dish, a pile of stored grain, a container filled with ingredients ready to cook. These details show what communities relied on for sustenance, what they cultivated, and how they managed resources. They also show how quickly the eruption disrupted daily activity. A meal, frozen in time, indicates that people had no opportunity to finish tasks before the ash descended. Another important type of evidence found beneath volcanic deposits is related to long-term occupation patterns. In regions with multiple eruptions over thousands of years, archaeologists observe alternating layers of ash and human settlement. This pattern demonstrates how people return to the same areas repeatedly, even after earlier generations experienced volcanic destruction. It shows resilience and practical reasoning. The soil enriched by volcanic material often becomes more fertile after some time has passed. Water flows stabilize, plants regrow, wildlife returns. People follow these cycles, rebuilding in places where the benefits of the land outweighed the risks. These repeated occupations also help researchers understand how knowledge was passed between generations. If a community rebuilt quickly after an eruption, it might indicate that the event was seen as part of a natural cycle rather than a lasting threat. If the interval between occupations was longer, it might reflect a deeper caution or a lack of resources to return sooner. The presence or absence of rebuilding tells a story about how people interpreted the land's behavior. One of the most striking examples of preserved remains comes from structures that collapsed under the weight of ash. When roofs fall inward, they can trap objects beneath them in ways that protect them from later disturbances. The collapsed roof creates a protective dome that shields artifacts from erosion, animals, and later human activity. When archaeologists uncover these areas, they often find tools, pottery, and personal belongings arranged the way they were when they were last used. This kind of preservation offers insight into craftsmanship, trade, and daily tasks. Ash layers also help identify moments when communities experienced sudden change. In some cases, the remains show that people fled quickly, leaving behind heavy tools or stored goods because there was no time to carry them. In other cases, the remains show calm abandonment, suggesting that people left in anticipation of danger rather than during the eruption itself. These differences help build a picture of how people interpreted early warning signs. Ground vibrations or small ash plumes may have prompted some communities to evacuate before the main event. Footprints leading away from settlements provide evidence of these early departures. Occasionally, volcanic preservation reveals objects that belong to individuals rather than households. Personal items such as ornaments, small tools, or objects thought to have symbolic value sometimes appear in the ash layers. These items are important because they show aspects of identity, social roles, or individual preference. Even a simple bead made from bone or stone carries information about craftsmanship, trade networks, and cultural practices. When these items are found close to human remains, they also suggest how people cared for their belongings or what they considered important enough to keep close during daily life. In regions where volcanic events were extremely large, preservation sometimes includes entire landscapes. Forests flattened by eruptions can leave impressions of trunks and branches preserved in layers of ash and sediment. River courses can be traced through layers to show how water flowed before and after the eruption. Fields used for farming can show boundaries created by early people. These environmental details help explain how communities shaped the land and how the land shaped them in return. The study of ash layers is not limited to what was buried. It also includes what formed above those layers in the years after the eruption. New vegetation eventually grows over the ash. Animals return. People rebuild. Each of these changes leaves traces in the soil. By examining the layers above and below volcanic deposits, researchers can see how the eruption influenced long-term adaptation. For example, they can see when agriculture resumed, when forests recovered, or when the climate shifted. This combination of human and environmental evidence creates a more complete understanding of ancient life. What makes all of this especially significant is that volcanic deposits often preserve traces from periods where written records do not exist. Much of early human history relies on physical evidence rather than written documentation. Without volcanic preservation, many of these traces would have disappeared completely. Tools would have decayed. Structures would have eroded. Footprints would have washed away. Even the memory of a settlement's existence might have vanished. The ash unintentionally becomes the reason we can reconstruct these moments. As more sites are uncovered, researchers continue to refine their understanding of how early people lived alongside volcanoes. Each new discovery adds another detail to the picture. A pattern of footprints reveals a path people walked. A collapsed structure reveals how a household was organized. A preserved cooking area reveals what foods were prepared and how meals were shared. These pieces together reveal not just facts, but the human experience behind those facts. The traces found beneath ash layers remind us that the people who lived through these eruptions were not abstractions. They had routines, preferences, families, and responsibilities. They faced challenges and made decisions based on what they understood at the time. Their lives were shaped by the land, but they also shaped the land in return. The details preserved in volcanic deposits give us a way to see how they move through their days and how they responded when those days were interrupted by forces beyond their control. When the smoke clears after a major volcanic eruption, the landscape enters a strange period where everything is quiet, still, and almost unrecognizable. This silence is not peaceful. It carries the weight of everything that happened before it. The noise of the eruption fades. The sky slowly regains its color. The heat dissipates, but what remains on the ground is an entire world paused at the moment the ash settled. These places buried under layers of volcanic deposits become snapshots of life at an exact point in time. They offer a rare opportunity to examine the structure, habits, and movement of ancient communities with a level of detail that normal soil, erosion, and weather cannot preserve. The idea of a city frozen in time often brings to mind a single dramatic event. But in reality, this kind of preservation depends on several factors aligning at once. The eruption must be forceful enough to bury everything quickly. The ash must fall thick and fast, sealing the space before scavengers, weather, or flames can alter it. The community must be close enough to the volcano that its buildings and objects are preserved exactly where they stood. And finally, the area must remain relatively undisturbed afterward, so later populations or natural processes do not destroy the evidence. What makes these buried settlements remarkable is how complete they are. While many archaeological sites contain fragments of structures or scattered objects, volcanic burial captures arrangement, orientation, and context. A pot remains on the floor where someone placed it. A tool rests on a table in a workshop. A group of items inside a storage room stays organized the way the last person arranged them. Even the shapes of furniture, walls, and woven materials may be preserved as voids or impressions in hardened ash. These details allow researchers to reconstruct not only the physical layout of ancient settlements, but also the rhythm of daily life that existed within them. One of the strongest examples of this phenomenon is found at well-known sites, but the concept applies to many regions around the world. After an eruption, the city or settlement beneath the ash becomes a kind of closed room. The air is cut off. The objects do not shift. The buildings collapse inward in predictable ways. Layers of ash settle from top to bottom at a consistent rate, capturing each moment in sequence. In some cases, the first layer preserves the initial response to the eruption. A series of footprints leading away from a home, a door left partially open, items scattered in a pattern that suggests panic. The next layers may cover debris from collapsing roofs or walls. Higher layers might show the final settling of ash after the main eruption has ended. Once the ash solidifies, it becomes harder to disturb. The materials beneath remain stable unless erosion or later human activity uncovers them. This stability is why buried cities can remain hidden for hundreds or even thousands of years. Over time, new soil accumulates above the ash. Vegetation grows, animals burrow. Humans may settle on top of the buried site without knowing what lies beneath. Only when natural processes or archaeological excavations cut through the layers does the ancient settlement reappear. The silence that follows an eruption can last decades or centuries. During this time, the evidence beneath the ash remains protected. Without sunlight, oxygen, or moisture, organic materials degrade extremely slowly. Wood dries out and stays intact. Seeds retain shape even if they are no longer viable. Fibers leave impressions that show weaving techniques. Bones remain undisturbed by predators. This means that cities buried by volcanic activity often contain a clearer record of daily life than many settlements that remained above ground and were gradually worn away by time. When researchers uncover these cities, they encounter not only the structures, but the decisions people made in the hours leading up to the eruption. A storage room might show signs of someone gathering essentials. A workshop might show unfinished tasks, abandoned mid-action. Path through the settlement might reveal the direction people traveled as they tried to escape. These details provide information about social hierarchy, labor organization, shared responsibilities, and the kinds of skills people used in their communities. One of the most telling features of these sites is the variety of structures preserved. Homes, workshops, communal spaces, storage areas, and outdoor areas all remain in the positions they occupied before the eruption. This gives researchers insight into how early cities were organized. For example, they can determine whether families lived together in individual structures or in shared communal spaces. They can see how work areas were arranged in relation to living areas. They can identify which tasks were considered important enough to have dedicated spaces. They can also see how people prepared for weather, stored food, or protected themselves from the elements. Different cities reveal different details depending on the cultural practices of the people who lived there. In some areas, pottery found in kitchens indicates what foods were commonly cooked. In others, grinding stones show evidence of grain processing. Tools might show signs of maintenance or repair. Metal objects, if the culture used metal, can reveal information about trade networks, resource availability, and technological skill. Even the size and shape of doorways can tell researchers about daily habits, social customs, or the kinds of activities performed inside the buildings. One of the most compelling aspects of these preserved cities is that they often show a mixture of long-term occupation and sudden abandonment. The lower layers of ash might cover well-maintained homes that reflect stability and routine. The upper layers deposited during the eruption capture the disruption. This contrast reveals not only how people lived, but how they reacted when their routines were interrupted by catastrophic events. Another important feature preserved in these cities is infrastructure. Paths, staircases, drainage systems, and storage pits all remain visible beneath the ash. These features reveal how early people managed water, waste, and movement. For example, a well-preserved drainage channel can show how a community diverted rainwater to protect homes from flooding. The layout of paths between structures can show the social flow of the community, whether people gathered in open spaces or preferred private areas. These details help researchers reconstruct not just the physical environment, but the social environment as well. The presence of unfinished work in buried cities is also revealing. A half-carved piece of wood, a pottery vessel in the early stages of shaping, or a metal tool mid-rep indicates what tasks people performed just before the eruption. These objects capture moments that would normally be invisible to history. They show not only what people used, but how they made and maintained the items important to their lives. This kind of evidence helps scholars understand ancient craftsmanship and the skill levels present in various communities. The materials found in buried cities also reveal trade patterns. If a settlement contains objects made of materials not found locally, researchers can trace trade routes and interactions between distant groups. For example, obsidian blades found far from volcanic regions suggest networks of exchange. Shells from coastal areas found in inland cities indicate long-distance travel or trade. Metal objects made from ores not found near the city reveal either trade or specialized knowledge in metallurgy. Food remains preserved in ash tell another part of the story. Charred grains, dried fruits, preserved seeds, and animal bones all reveal dietary patterns. They show what crops were grown locally, what foods were stored for winter, and what meals were common. These remains also indicate seasonal cycles, agricultural practices, and the degree of food security people had before the eruption. The study of these materials helps researchers understand which foods were staples and which were used for special occasions. Another crucial detail found in cities frozen by ash is the presence of animal remains. Domestic animals such as goats, sheep, cattle, and dogs often appear in these sites. Their positions sometimes indicate whether they were housed indoors, kept in pens, or allowed to roam freely. Animal bones with cut marks show butchering practices. The presence of young animals reveals breeding cycles. These details help researchers understand the economic and practical roles animals played in early societies. The condition of human remains in these cities varies depending on the temperature, depth, and timing of the ashall. In some cases, people had enough time to escape, leaving few or no remains behind. In other cases, individuals were caught by surprise, preserving not only their skeletons, but sometimes impressions of their final positions. These remains offer insight into age distribution, health, diet, and physical stress levels. They also revealed patterns of escape or shelter-seeking behavior. The silence after the eruption also created opportunities for environmental clues to settle alongside human activity. Pollen grains trapped in ash layers show what plants grew in the region. Charcoal from fires indicates vegetation types and fuel use. Insects preserved in ash can reveal seasonal timing. These environmental markers help researchers determine whether the eruption occurred during a growing season, after harvest, or in the early stages of planting. They also help reconstruct climate patterns and local ecosystems. Once a buried city is uncovered, researchers treat it with extraordinary care. The ash may be fragile. It can crumble easily if handled incorrectly. Excavations involve slow brushing, careful measurements, and documentation of every object's exact position. This process is time-consuming, but it's necessary to preserve the context that makes these sites so informative. Each discovery, no matter how small, adds another detail to the understanding of the community. As more buried cities are found around the world, patterns begin to emerge. People across different regions responded to volcanic eruptions in similar ways. They built homes adapted to their local climate. They stored food in similar patterns. They relied on predictable routines. When the eruption occurred, they reacted based on the warning signs they recognized. These patterns reveal the consistency of human behavior across time and geography. The silence after the smoke, preserved in ash and hardened sediment, is never truly empty. It is filled with information about people who lived their lives unaware that their final moments would become part of the archaeological record. The details they left behind do not speak loudly. They wait in the layers of ash, steady and unchanged. People in ancient communities rarely intended to create myths. Most of the time, what later generations call a myth began as an attempt to explain something confusing, unusual, or frightening. When an eruption erased a settlement or disrupted a region, the people who survived had to make sense of what they had seen. They did not have instruments to measure pressure beneath the ground or tools to detect gas emissions. They witnessed strange sounds, changes in the sky, and shifts in the landscape, and they tried to describe those experiences in terms familiar to them. Over time, those descriptions developed into stories. These stories carried the memory of what happened long after the physical evidence was buried beneath layers of ash. To understand how myths formed after volcanic disasters, it helps to begin with the survivors' immediate experience. The eruption had already reshaped the environment. A mountain that had been silent for generations suddenly darkened the sky. Trees had fallen. Rivers had changed their course. Fields were covered in ash. Homes were gone or damaged. The survivors were often displaced, moving to safer regions where they had to start over. They brought with them not only their belongings, but also their memories of what had happened. Those memories formed the foundation of the stories they later told. Most early communities shared information orally. The survivors would gather with neighbors, newcomers, and allied groups and tell them what they had seen. They would describe the noise, the heat, the falling ash, the difficulty breathing, the panic as people tried to escape, and the days or weeks afterward when the land remained unstable. These descriptions were not meant to entertain. They were warnings communicated so that others might recognize the same signs if the mountain ever grew restless again. With each retelling, the details adjusted slightly, not to distort the truth, but because memory naturally shifts over time. People emphasize what frightened them most, what surprised them, or what they felt others needed to hear. As generations pass, these descriptions gradually moved from practical warnings to structured narratives. This transition happened not because people wanted to turn them into legends, but because storytelling is an effective way to preserve information. A structured narrative is easier to remember and easier to pass on. A simple example might be the idea that loud noises inside the mountain meant it was preparing to erupt. At first, this was a straightforward observation. Later, it might be described as the mountain expressing displeasure. Eventually, the story might evolve further, depending on how the community interpreted the world. This progression from memory to narrative happened in many regions where volcanic activity shaped daily life. Communities developed stories that fit their environment, their values, and their worldview. The stories varied widely across cultures, but they often shared common features. They explained why the mountain behaved the way it did. They described what people should do when certain signs appeared. They offered reasons for the destruction, reasons that made sense within the culture's understanding of nature. Even if the stories included ideas that modern readers interpret as symbolic, they originally functioned as a practical way of storing information. Some communities describe volcanoes as places where powerful forces lived. These forces did not have to be supernatural in the way people think of such ideas today. They were simply a way of describing the mountain's behavior through accessible concepts. The mountain produced sound, heat, and movement, so it seemed reasonable to describe it as something that reacted to the world. This helped people form an organized picture of how eruptions worked. If the mountain responded to certain actions, then people might avoid specific behaviors. If the mountain became restless after a long period of silence, then they might prepare for a possible eruption. Other communities developed stories that explain the origin of the volcano itself. These stories provided a long-term view of the mountain's behavior. For example, if a settlement had been destroyed by an eruption many generations earlier, the story might describe the event as part of a historical cycle. This gave people a sense of predictability, even if the actual timing remained uncertain. The idea that the mountain had a long past helped communities understand why eruptions happened at seemingly irregular intervals. It made the event part of a larger pattern rather than an isolated disaster. Across different regions, people also created stories to explain the consequences of volcanic activity. They observed that ash made soil fertile after some time. They noticed that forests regrew quickly in volcanic areas. They saw new land forming where lava flowed. These observations became part of the stories told to children and to newcomers. The stories did not merely describe destruction. They also described renewal. This balance between loss and regeneration helped communities process the long-term effects of eruptions. It provided a sense that the land could recover and that people could rebuild. In some regions, myths included specific instructions for dealing with early warning signs. These instructions might have been practical advice encoded in narrative form. For example, a story about the mountain changing color might actually refer to visible changes in gas emissions. A story about unusual animal behavior might reflect observations of wildlife fleeing the area before an eruption. These details were recorded in stories because stories lasted longer than spoken warnings alone. When people told their children to pay attention to certain signs, they often embedded the advice within a familiar narrative so the child would remember it. Many myths formed after large eruptions that displaced entire communities. When survivors joined neighboring groups or moved into new regions, they brought their experiences with them. Their stories mixed with those of the communities they joined. Over time, the story might shift as the new community applied its own understanding of nature. This blending of narratives created myths that combined memory, experience, and cultural interpretation. Even though the story changed, the core information often remained intact. The development of these stories also shows how early people viewed natural forces as part of their lives. They did not separate daily experience from the larger environment. The mountain was a constant presence. Its shape influenced the weather. Its soil supported crops. Its slopes provided resources. When it erupted, the event became central to the community's identity. The stories that emerged after such events helped define how people saw their place in the landscape. Archaeological evidence supports this connection between myth and experience in regions with long histories of volcanic activity. Layers of ash correspond to periods where new myths appeared, or older myths gained prominence. This does not mean that myths developed instantly after the eruption. Instead, it means the eruption created a need for explanation, which gradually shaped the stories told in later generations. Researchers can track how stories changed by studying the cultural layers above the ash deposits. These layers include traces of rebuilding, shifts in settlement patterns, and changes in the materials people used. Myths also reflect how communities understood time. For example, if a story describes a long ago eruption as a singular event of great importance, it may indicate that the community considered the eruption a turning point in its history. If a story describes multiple eruptions as part of an ongoing cycle, it suggests that people observed patterns over many generations. In both cases, the stories reveal how people tracked and interpreted large-scale natural events without formal records. Some myths emphasize the danger of living near a volcano. These stories often serve as cautionary tales. They describe the eruption in terms that highlight its unpredictability and the importance of respecting the land. In these stories, the mountain is not necessarily a hostile force. It is simply a part of the world that demands awareness and preparation. These narratives remind listeners that life near a volcano carries risks that must be managed carefully. Other stories focus on the moments after an eruption, describing how people rebuilt or how the land changed. These stories emphasize resilience rather than fear. They describe how communities returned to the area, reseeded fields, and adapted to the new landscape. These rebuilding stories help explain why people continue to live near volcanoes, even after destructive eruptions. The land offered long-term benefits that outweighed the short-term dangers. There are also myths that describe the sound of an eruption in vivid detail. The rumbling of the ground, the explosion of gas, and the roar of ash columns became metaphors that helped communities remember the event. These metaphors were rooted in sensory experience, not symbolic language. They helped listeners imagine the intensity of the eruption, even if they had not witnessed it themselves. This created a shared cultural understanding of what an eruption sounded like and why it was important to recognize those sounds in the future. Myths sometimes describe the sky during an eruption. People saw the sky darken as ash blocked sunlight. They saw lightning in the ash cloud. They saw unusual colors at sunrise and sunset in the days following the eruption. These phenomena contributed to stories about the sky reacting to the mountain. In reality, these effects are caused by particles in the atmosphere scattering light. But to ancient people, they were signs that the environment itself was responding to the eruption. These observations formed part of the narrative passed down through generations. Another aspect of myth involves the patterns left behind on the landscape. Lava flows that hardened into ridges or fields of ash that covered valleys became physical reminders of the eruption. Communities integrated these features into their stories. They explained how the land got its shape and why certain areas should be avoided. These explanations were not abstract. They were practical interpretations meant to guide behavior. Many myths that seem symbolic today originally served as maps of safe and unsafe areas. What makes these stories especially important is their longevity. Physical structures can be buried, destroyed, or eroded. Tools decay, footprints fade, but stories can survive in communities for thousands of years. In some cases, stories have preserved the memory of eruptions that happened long before the community developed writing. These oral records provide valuable historical context. When researchers compare the timeline of a myth with geological evidence, they sometimes find that the story accurately describes an eruption that occurred many generations earlier. This suggests that myths, despite their narrative form, can be reliable carriers of historical knowledge. They contain information about the timing, scale, and effects of eruptions. They also show how communities adapted afterward. This connection between story and evidence helps researchers understand the history of regions where written records are absent. It also demonstrates that ancient people observed the natural world carefully and communicated their observations effectively. As myths continued to evolve, they shaped the identity of the communities that told them. They influenced how people viewed the mountain, how they responded to its warning signs, and how they rebuilt after disasters. These stories served as collective memories that guided decisions long after the original witnesses had passed away. They connected people to their land and the generations who lived there before them. Preservation through volcanic activity is often associated with ash. But lava itself plays a significant role in storing information from the past. At first thought, lava seems too destructive to protect anything. It moves with heat high enough to burn organic material instantly. It spreads across the land in ways that break apart structures and erase familiar shapes. Yet lava also behaves in patterns that allow certain details to survive. The way it cools, the surfaces it captures, and the long-term stability of the hardened rock create conditions that keep information locked in place for far longer than most natural environments can manage. To understand how lava preserves material, it helps to think about the difference between direct contact and indirect influence. Items in the immediate path of a fast-moving flow are usually burned or transformed. But the edges of the flow, the areas where heat is lower and movement slower, interact differently with the environment. In these zones, lava may engulf objects without completely destroying them. It may leave cavities where items once stood. It may harden around structures in ways that produce molds or impressions. These features reveal details about the objects, the buildings, and the land beneath. One common form of preservation occurs when lava surrounds a tree. Instead of burning the tree entirely, the lever sometimes heats it to the point where the wood burns away slowly, leaving a hollow tube inside the solidified rock. Those tree molds retain the shape of the trunk, the direction the tree leaned, and sometimes even the texture of the bark. In areas with ancient lava flows, these molds provide evidence of forest that no longer exist. They show what kinds of trees grew in the region, how large they were, and how dense the forest might have been. Although the trees themselves are gone, their shapes remain. Similar processes can preserve human-made structures. When lava flows around a building, the internal space may retain its form after the materials inside have burned away. This creates a natural cast of the building's floor plan. Archaeologists studying ancient settlements built near volcanoes sometimes find these casts beneath the hardened lava. They can trace the outlines of walls, doorways, and storage areas. They can identify the shapes of tools left on the ground. They can even detect the texture of materials that touch the lava briefly before burning. These impressions provide valuable information about construction techniques and daily life. Lava flows also preserve the surface of the land in remarkable detail. When lava cools quickly, it can capture patterns in soil, footprints, farming rows, and stone arrangements. The hardened rock becomes a long-term record of the activity that occurred shortly before the eruption. In some regions, ancient pathways used by early travelers remain visible on labor surfaces. These paths show the direction of travel, the width of the route, and the effort required to move across the terrain. They reveal patterns of movement that would otherwise be lost. Another way lava acts as a form of preservation is through the protection it provides once it has cooled. The hardened rock shields the layers beneath from erosion, animal activity, and later human disturbance. Sites buried by lava may remain untouched for thousands of years until erosion or excavation exposes them. This makes lava-covered areas valuable locations for our archaeological study because the layers beneath the flow often contain preserved artifacts that have not been altered by later activity. The preservation potential of lava depends on its type, speed, and temperature. For example, basaltic lever which flows more fluidly and cools relatively quickly, can preserve surface features well. It forms a hard crust that traps details before deeper layers fully solidify. In contrast, thicker and more viscous lava types may destroy more material, but still preserve impressions in certain conditions. Understanding the behavior of different lavas helps researchers determine where preservation is most likely to occur. In some regions, lava has protected entire cave systems. If a lava flow covers the entrance to a cave, the interior remains sealed from outside disturbance. Over thousands of years, the cave may retain delicate artifacts, plant remains, and even animal traces. When the lava eventually wears away or is breached by explorers, the preserved interior offers a detailed look at ancient environments. These caves act as storage spaces where time slows dramatically, allowing researchers to examine materials that would have deteriorated in open air. Lava tubes also play a significant role in preservation. These tubes form when the surface of a lava flow cools and hardens, while molten lava continues to move beneath it. Once the flow stops, the molten lava drains out, leaving a hollow tunnel. These tubes can stretch for kilometers and provide a sheltered environment where ancient materials may remain undisturbed. Some tubes were used by early humans as shelters, storage areas, or pathways. Items left inside these tubes can remain preserved for long periods, especially in dry or stable climates. The structure of the tubes also reveals how the lava moved, providing geological information that complements archaeological evidence. Preservation within lava-covered areas is not limited to objects or structures. It also includes chemical traces. When lava heats the ground beneath it, it alters the chemical composition of the soil and rocks. These alterations provide clues about the temperature, duration, and pattern of the flow. They also reveal which materials were present before the eruption. In some cases, organic material that burned during the flow leaves behind distinct carbon patterns that researchers can analyze. These patterns help identify the types of plants or wood that once grew in the area. Another aspect of preservation involves the formation of new minerals during the cooling process. As lava solidifies, it traps gases, minerals, and small fragments of the environment. These inclusions become part of the rock structure. By studying them, scientists can learn about the environment at the time of the eruption. For example, trapped gas bubbles may contain information about the atmosphere's composition. Mineral formations may reveal the presence of water, plant material, or other elements that influence the cooling process. In some cases, lava preserves ancient footprints in extraordinary detail. These footprints were made by humans or animals walking across a surface that was still warm and soft enough to record impressions, but stable enough not to collapse. Once the lava cooled, the footprints hardened and remained intact. These preserved steps allow researchers to estimate the speed, direction, and even group size of those who walked across the fresh surface. They provide rare insights into movement patterns during the period, immediately after the eruption. The ability of lava to preserve details also extends to traces of tools and early technologies. When lava covers a work site, the positions of tools, the arrangement of materials, and the outlines of structures remain visible in the hardened rock. In some cases, lava flows have captured the shape of wooden objects that burned away, leaving only the impression behind. These impressions reveal the size, shape, and craftsmanship of tools used by ancient communities. They help fill gaps in the archaeological record when the physical objects themselves have not survived. Lava also protects buried layers of soil and artifacts from weathering. Over time, layers beneath the lava remain stable while the surrounding environment changes. When researchers excavate beneath a lava flow, they often find well-preserved artifacts, including pottery, stone tools, and food remains. The lava acts as a barrier preventing moisture, erosion, and biological activity from altering the buried materials. This protection makes lava-covered sites valuable for understanding long-term human occupation patterns. In certain regions, large lava flows have buried entire landscapes, including fields, roads, and settlements. When these areas are uncovered, they offer detailed insight into how early people organized their land. For example, the layout of agricultural fields remains visible beneath the lava. The arrangement of irrigation channels shows how water was managed. The placement of storage pits reveals how food was preserved. These details provide a broader view of how communities interacted with their environment. It is also important to consider the role lava plays in preserving geological information. The composition of lava flows helps researchers understand the history of volcanic activity in the region. By studying the layers of lava, they can determine when eruptions occurred, how large they were, and how often they happened. This information, combined with the archaeological evidence preserved beneath the flows, helps build a timeline of human occupation and environmental change. The combination of ash and lava creates especially informative sites. Ash can preserve delicate materials, while lava preserves larger structures and long-term features. Together they create a layered archive of events. A settlement may be buried first by ash and then by lava, each layer capturing different details. The ash records the immediate impact of the eruption. The labor records the shape of the landscape and the structures beneath. Together, they reveal the full sequence of events. The preservation effects of lava extend far beyond the initial eruption. Once the lava cools, the hardened rock remains stable for thousands of years. It resists erosion better than many other surfaces. It protects what lies beneath it. It retains the impressions formed during the cooling process. This stability makes lava-covered regions reliable sources of long-term information about both natural and human activity. As researchers continue to analyze lava-covered sites around the world, they discover more ways that volcanic rock acts as a record of the past. Each new site offers additional details about how lava moved, how it interacted with the environment, and what it preserved in the process. These discoveries show that lava does more than destroy. It also creates the conditions for preservation, shaping the way we understand ancient life. Long before the development of written plans or formal architectural systems, people living in volcanic regions built structures and tools suited to their environment through observation, repetition, and adjustment. Their engineering was not based on theories or textbooks. It grew from generations of practical experience. They learned how the land behaved, how materials responded to heat, how to make use of the resources scattered around volcanic slopes, and how to position their settlements to reduce risk without sacrificing the advantages of living near fertile volcanic soils. These early builders were not engineers in the modern sense, but their actions reveal careful planning and an understanding of their surroundings that allowed them to thrive in areas shaped by fire. One of the most important skills early communities developed was the ability to choose where to build. Volcanic landscapes include a variety of terrains, each with different levels of stability. Some areas are composed of older hardened lava that remains solid for centuries. Other areas consist of looser ash or fragmented rock that shifts easily during rain or seismic activity. The people who settled these regions quickly learned which surfaces supported heavy structures and which ones eroded or collapsed. Their choices reflect knowledge acquired through trial and error. Archaeological studies show that many communities built on ridges of old lava flows, avoiding unstable slopes that might collapse during an eruption or after heavy rainfall. Another key skill involved recognizing natural barriers. Volcanic regions contain channels formed by previous lava flows. These channels can act as pathways for future lava, but they also serve as barriers that divert flows away from certain areas. Early communities sometimes built settlements on elevated ridges between these channels. The ridges provided protection from the movement of molten rock and allowed people to understand which areas were likely to be damaged during a future eruption. Even without knowing the geological processes, people recognized that certain areas remained intact after repeated eruptions. They used this knowledge to select safe locations for homes, storage buildings, and communal spaces. The materials used in volcanic regions also reveal practical engineering knowledge. Volcanic rock, especially basalt, is abundant around many volcanoes. It is durable and resistant to weathering. Early builders used it to construct walls, pathways, and foundations. The shape and size of the stones indicate deliberate selection. Some communities chose large, heavy stones for stability. Others relied on smaller stones that could be fitted closely together. In regions where lava cooled into natural slabs, these slabs were used as paving stones. The use of local rock reduced transportation effort and created structures that blended with the environment. In addition to rock, volcanic regions often contain natural clays that form from weathered ash. These clays could be shaped into bricks or used as binding materials. Archaeological evidence shows that some early communities mixed volcanic ash with organic fibers to create stronger building materials. This combination reduced cracking during drying and provided insulation against temperature changes. The ability to create composite materials demonstrates an understanding of how different substances interact. People who lived near volcanoes did not merely use what they found. They manipulated materials to create stronger structures. Volcanic landscapes also influenced how people built their homes. In some regions, structures were partially dug into the ground to take advantage of stable temperatures below the surface. These semi-subterranean homes remained cool during hot seasons and warm during colder periods. They were also more resistant to ashfall because the lower walls were protected by the surrounding soil. In other regions, homes were elevated on stone platforms to avoid flooding from heavy rains or mud flows triggered by eruptions. These variations show that people adapted their architectural designs to the specific challenges posed by volcanic activity. Water management was another area where early communities demonstrated engineering skill. Volcanic soils absorb water efficiently, but heavy rain can cause rapid runoff on hardened lava surfaces. This runoff can create sudden streams that threaten settlements. To manage this, communities built simple channels and drainage paths. They placed homes on higher ground and used ditches to redirect water away from central living areas. In some locations, they created small reservoirs or siestans to collect rainwater. These structures often used volcanic rock to line the interior, preventing erosion and maintaining structural integrity. The ability to control water flow was crucial for survival, especially in regions where eruptions altered the landscape frequently. Agriculture near volcanoes required another level of skill. Volcanic soils, once weathered, are some of the most fertile in the world. They contain minerals that support robust plant growth. Early farmers recognized this fertility and developed methods to take advantage of it. They used simple tools made from volcanic stone to till the soil. In some regions, they created terraces on volcanic slopes. These terraces reduced erosion, prevented soil loss during heavy rain, and allowed crops to grow in well-defined rows. The terraces also stabilized the slopes, reducing the risk of landslides triggered by seismic activity. In places where ashal was common, communities learned how to clear fields quickly and prepare them for new planting seasons. They recognized that fresh ash could damage crops, but that once mixed into the soil, it improved fertility. This understanding allowed them to recover more quickly after eruptions. They also experimented with crop rotation to maintain soil nutrients. These agricultural techniques show that people learn to work with volcanic activity rather than avoid it entirely. Some volcanic regions contain natural hot springs and geothermal areas. Early communities used these features for practical purposes. They placed structures near warm ground to take advantage of natural heating. They used hot springs for bathing and cooking. In some places, the steam from geothermal vents was used to dry food or harden clay objects. These uses show that people observed the landscape carefully and adapted their routines to benefit from geological activity. Their relationship with the volcano was not limited to avoiding danger. They found ways to use the heat and energy it produced. Tools made from volcanic materials also reflect early engineering skills. Obsidian, a type of volcanic glass, fractures with extremely sharp edges. Early people used it to make blades, arrowheads, and cutting tools. These tools were sharper than many metal blades produced much later. The ability to work with obsidian required precision. The glass breaks in predictable patterns, but only with controlled force. Skilled workers could shape it into tools with consistent edges. The presence of obsidian tools in distant regions also shows that trade networks extended far beyond the volcanic areas where the material was found. People recognized the value of volcanic resources and exchanged them over long distances. The movement of people across volcanic landscapes required careful planning. Lava fields can be difficult to cross with uneven surfaces and sharp rocks. Early travelers created pathways that followed natural contours. These paths often used stable ridges between lava channels. Over time, repeated use created worn tracks in the rock. These tracks show the routes people relied on to move between settlements, trade areas, and resource sites. They provide insight into regional communication and interaction. In areas where eruptions occurred frequently, early communities developed evacuation strategies. These strategies were not formalized, but they can be seen in the evidence left behind. Footprints found in volcanic deposits sometimes show organized patterns, suggesting that people moved in groups towards safer areas. The presence of storage pits near escape routes suggests that people prepared supplies for emergencies. The placement of temporary shelters on higher ground indicates that communities identified safe zones in advance. These patterns show that people learned how to respond to volcanic signals based on experience shared over generations. The design of storage structures also reflects adaptation to volcanic environments. Food and important items were often kept in underground pits lined with volcanic rock. These pits protected supplies from ashfall, moisture, and scavengers. They also helped regulate temperature, keeping food cool and extending its preservation. In regions where eruptions disrupted trade routes, these storage systems provided communities with reserves that helped them recover more quickly. Another significant aspect of ancient engineering in volcanic areas is the use of resources created by past eruptions. Hardened lava forms natural shelters and caves. Some communities use these caves as homes or as storage areas. The thick rock walls provided insulation and protection from ash, wind, and rain. They also served as natural fire breaks during smaller eruptions or forest fires. The use of these shelters required an understanding of their stability. People chose caves located at safe distances from active vents and avoided areas prone to collapse. Some ancient builders also used volcanic conduits, natural channels, created by earlier lava flows to move water or to create protected passageways. These conduits were stable because the labor had already cooled and solidified. Their smooth interior surfaces allowed water to flow easily. In some cases, early engineers expanded these conduits or modified them to meet their needs. These modifications show that people were not simply using the landscape as they found it. They were altering it to improve access, safety, and efficiency. In certain volcanic regions, large stone structures built by early communities show signs of deliberate alignment with geological features. Builders placed walls along fault lines to increase stability. They positioned entrances to avoid prevailing winds or ashful directions. They planned settlements so that major pathways were oriented away from potential lava routes. These decisions reflect a detailed understanding of the land's behavior. Even without formal knowledge of geology, people recognized the patterns and adjusted their construction methods accordingly. The presence of long-term settlements in volcanic areas shows that these engineering strategies worked. Communities persisted for hundreds or even thousands of years, despite periodic eruptions. Their ability to adapt demonstrates resilience and practical intelligence. They did not view the volcano as a constant threat, but as a feature of the environment that required attention and understanding. Their engineering was not based on prediction, but on adaptation. They learned from each eruption and adjusted their methods to improve their safety and efficiency. Archaeological excavations in these regions reveal how engineering practices changed over time. Early structures might be simple and quickly built. Later structures often show improvements, such as stronger walls, better foundations, or more efficient water management systems. These changes reflect accumulated knowledge passed down through generations. Each eruption taught the community something new. Each rebuilding phase incorporated these lessons. The landscape became a record not only of volcanic activity, but also of human adaptation. As communities grew, their engineering became more complex. They built larger structures. They created communal areas for trade, storage, and shared activities. They expanded agricultural fields and improved irrigation systems. They developed specialized roles, with some individuals focusing on construction, tool making, or agriculture. This specialization improved efficiency, and allowed communities to thrive. Volcanic resources played a central role in these developments, providing materials that were durable, abundant, and suited to various tasks. The engineering solutions created by these early communities represent a collaboration between people and the environment. The volcano shaped the land, and the people shaped their strategies based on what they observed. The relationship was dynamic. As the landscape changed, so did the communities. Their ability to understand and use volcanic features speaks to their ingenuity and adaptability. Some landscapes shaped by volcanoes look straightforward today, but many were once very different. Entire valleys existed where lakes now sit. Coastlines stretched farther out before sinking beneath the water. Rivers flowed along routes that no longer appear on modern maps. When eruptions altered the ground, people living in those regions had no way to record the changes in writing or preserve accurate maps. Their knowledge of the land depended on memory, observation, and the paths established by earlier generations. When the environment shifted suddenly, much of that information was lost. The disappearance of landmarks created confusion. Settlements that once stood on solid ground slipped beneath ash, lava, or water. The result is that some ancient societies appear in the archaeological record only briefly, leaving hints of their existence without a clear explanation for why they vanished. To understand how volcanic activity can erase parts of the landscape, it helps to consider how eruptions disrupt patterns that people rely on. A valley used for farming may be filled with ash in a matter of hours. A river that once provided fresh water may change direction after a landslide triggered by an eruption. A coastline may shift due to large amounts of ash settling on the seafloor. Even small changes can make travel routes dangerous or impossible. When these changes happen on a large scale, they force communities to relocate, sometimes permanently. The movement of people away from an altered region leaves behind settlements that not rebuilt and paths that fall out of use. Volcanic regions often contain depressions formed by the collapse of magma chambers after eruptions. These depressions, known as calderas, can be several kilometers wide. Over time, they may fill with water to form lakes. In ancient times, these areas might have been fertile valleys or sites of long-term settlement. When the ground collapsed, entire communities could disappear. The people who left carried their knowledge with them, but the physical evidence of their presence remained hidden beneath layers of sediment or submerged beneath water. Archaeologists studying these regions rely on geological records, underwater surveys, and layers of ash to determine what once existed there. In some places, maps made from memory or oral descriptions were no longer accurate after the landscape changed. Trails that once followed predictable routes around mountains or through valleys became blocked by hardened lava or newly formed cliffs. When survivors attempted to return, they found the land unrecognizable. Familiar features were gone. New hazards had appeared. Without stable landmarks, it became difficult to reconstruct the paths used by earlier generations. As a result, some regions that once supported vibrant settlements became abandoned. One reason for this abandonment is that volcanic deposits can alter soil properties dramatically. Thick ash layers may take decades to weather into fertile soil. Before that transformation occurs, the land is unproductive. People forced to relocate for survival may not return even after the soil becomes fertile again. Instead, New generations grow up in different areas, unaware that their ancestors once lived in the abandoned region. Over centuries, the memory of the earlier settlement fades. This explains why some ancient communities appear in the archaeological record only in the context of volcanic destruction, with no indication of what happened afterward. Sunken landscapes created by eruptions also contribute to lost histories. When rivers or lakes expand due to volcanic activity, they can submerge settlements at the edges of the water. In shallow cases, structures can remain intact beneath the surface. Archaeologists have found stone walls, wooden posts, and artifacts preserved underwater in regions affected by volcanic disruption. The water protects these materials from decay in a way that open air cannot. The combination of volcanic burial and submersion creates unique environments where evidence remains undisturbed for long periods. Ancient people navigating these changes tried to adjust as best they could. They moved to higher ground, relocated fields, and created new paths for travel. These adjustments required knowledge of the land's new shape. Over time, communities constructed fresh mental maps based on updated observations. The older landscape existed only in stories, if at all. These stories often became vague in later generations, describing the old land in ways that lacked precise details. This contributed to the idea that some places were mythical rather than real, even though they had once existed. When archaeologists later uncovered submerged or ash-covered towns, the discoveries revealed how significantly the land had changed. Another factor that contributed to the loss of ancient landscapes is the speed of some eruptions. In certain cases, an eruption could trigger a landslide that traveled rapidly across the land, burying structures under rocks and debris. These landslides, sometimes called liahars or debris avalanches, can move for many kilometers. They destroy everything in their path and bury it under thick layers of unstable material. The settlements beneath these deposits are difficult to excavate because of their depth and the hazardous conditions created by the loose debris. Many such sites remain hidden, known only through indirect geological clues. Coastal regions experienced another form of alteration. When large volcanic islands erupted or collapsed, they displaced huge amounts of water, triggering waves that reshaped coastlines. These waves might erode settlements, flood plains, or deposit marine sand far inland. The loss of coastal settlements created gaps and trade routes. Goods that once traveled along these coastal paths had to be rerouted or abandoned. This disruption affected not only the immediate area, but also regions connected through trade. If a volcanic event destroyed a key port or settlement, the flow of goods changed and new centers of activity emerged elsewhere. The shifting of valleys and coastlines also made some regions appear more dangerous than they actually were. Later generations might avoid an area simply because its terrain seemed unstable or unusual. Steep cliffs, where gentle slopes once existed, or unpredictable rivers, where stable crossings used to be, could discourage settlement. Without people living in the area, the land remained unused, and the old settlements remained buried. In addition to physical changes, volcanic activity can alter water sources in ways that affect long-term habitation. Springs may dry up, or new ones may appear. Rivers may carry ash for years after a large eruption, making the water unsafe to drink. Lakes may become acidic due to volcanic gases. Communities dependent on fresh water must relocate when these changes occur. The places they leave behind may never be reoccupied if water sources do not return. This leads to the long-term abandonment of regions that once supported large populations. As researchers investigate these landscapes, they piece together the sequence of events that reshaped the terrain. Layers of ash reveal the order of eruptions. The thickness of deposits indicates the size of each eruption. The presence of buried structures, or agricultural rows, shows where people once lived and worked. Changes in river channels or coastline markers provide additional clues. Through this combination of geological and archaeological evidence, researchers build a clearer picture of how volcanic activity affected ancient communities. One of the most telling forms of evidence comes from the remains of ancient fields preserved beneath lava or ash. These fields show the layout of crops, the width of planting rows, and the irrigation structures used by farmers. When such fields appear in areas now underwater or buried beneath lava, they reveal how drastically the land has changed. They also show the extent of human activity before the disruption. Some fields appear well maintained, indicating long-term occupation. Others show signs of hurried abandonment, with tools left in place and partially completed tasks frozen in time. Lost pathways preserved in hardened lava also tell a story. These paths often appear as shallow grooves or smooth surfaces where repeated footsteps wore down the rock. They reveal the routes people used to travel between settlements or resource areas. When these paths lead into regions now covered by lava, ash, or water, they indicate that the land once extended farther or had a different shape. These routes provide a map of the past that no longer matches the surface of the earth. Some ancient communities built structures along the edges of valleys that later collapsed or filled with volcanic material. When researchers excavate these areas, they find that the structures are tilted or partially buried, indicating that the ground shifted beneath them. These shifts reveal the direction and magnitude of land movement caused by eruptions. They also show how people attempted to repair or reinforce structures in the years before a major eruption occurred. Sunken landscapes also affect the archaeological record in another way. When settlements are submerged, the sediment at the bottom of lakes or newly formed bodies of water accumulates slowly. This sediment can bury artifacts gently, preserving them in layers. When researchers use underwater tools to examine these layers, they find pottery, tools, and building materials preserved much more effectively than in open-air sites. The water protects the materials from temperature changes, wind erosion, and animal activity. This makes underwater volcanic regions especially valuable for understanding ancient life. The disappearance of land beneath water, or ash, has another consequence. It removes the visual connection between modern communities and their ancient predecessors. People today may live near a lake without realizing that a valley once existed beneath the water. They may walk across hardened lava without knowing the homes, fields, and paths lie buried below. This lack of visible evidence creates the impression that certain ancient cultures had small or isolated populations, when they may have been larger and more complex than assumed. Volcanic regions also contain natural traps for archaeological material. When a valley fills with the ash and later erodes, artifacts can become concentrated in certain layers. These concentrations reveal patterns of daily life. They show where people gathered, where they worked, and how they interacted with their environment. In some areas, the ash acts like a filter, separating materials based on weight or size. This sorting helps researchers understand how objects were distributed before the eruption. As researchers uncover more evidence of lost landscapes, they gain a better understanding of how ancient civilizations adapted to the challenges presented by volcanic activity. They learn to recognize signs of danger, to choose stable ground for building, to locate reliable water sources, and to navigate altered terrain. Their ability to survive and rebuild reflects resilience and practical knowledge rather than luck. The exploration of these landscapes continues to reveal the depth of human experience in volcanic regions. Each submerged valley, each abandoned settlement, and each preserved path adds another dimension to the story. Across different points in history, there were moments when a volcanic eruption did not merely disrupt a single valley or a single coastline. Instead, it altered conditions across entire regions and, in some cases, across the world. When a near eruption was large enough, ash and gaseous particles rose far above the local sky and entered the upper layers of the atmosphere. Once there, the material spread across continents, dimmed sunlight, changed temperatures, and affected ecosystems thousands of kilometers away from the actual volcano. These large-scale effects shaped the lives of communities that had never even heard of the mountain that produced the eruption. The people who lived through such events tried to explain them using the tools available to them at the time, often creating long-lasting stories or customs that survived longer than the physical traces of the eruption itself. To understand how the sky could turn black, far from the eruption, it helps to start with the way volcanic plumes behave. When a major eruption occurs, the force of the explosion sends ash, gases, and tiny particles upward. Smaller eruptions send this material a few kilometers into the air, but truly large eruptions can send it into the stratosphere. Once the particles reach this region of the atmosphere, they remain suspended for months or even years. Winds carry the material around the globe. The ash does not fall immediately. Instead, the sky becomes hazy and sunlight weakens. Colors during sunrise and sunset change. Temperatures drop as the particles block a portion of the sun's energy from reaching the ground. Communities far from the eruption site would have seen these changes without any context. Their sky darkened, weather patterns shifted, growing seasons shortened, crops failed or grew weak. Days felt cooler than expected. People noticed the difference, but had no way to connect it to a distant volcano. Their explanations relied on observation, tradition, and interpretation. Some groups recorded unusual seasons in stories. Others changed their rituals around planting and harvesting because the usual cues no longer matched reality. The idea that the sky could change because of events happening far away was not part of their worldview. Yet their experiences reflect the reach of volcanic activity. Large eruptions also affected trade routes. Before modern transportation, trade relied on predictable weather and stable paths. When eruptions altered climate patterns, storms became more frequent in some regions, while droughts spread in others. These changes disrupted travel. Traders avoided regions affected by unpredictable weather. Goods moved more slowly. Crops used for trade suffered. The effects rippled outward. Even communities that were not directly affected by ash or darkness felt the disruption through food shortages, higher prices, or a lack of imported materials. This created economic pressure that could last for years. Agriculture suffered the most during periods of volcanic cooling. Plants depend on sunlight and stable temperatures. When ash in the atmosphere reduces solar energy, plant growth slows. Shorter growing seasons mean smaller harvests. In ancient times, communities relied heavily on seasonal cycles. A single bad harvest could create serious food shortages. 2 or 3 bad seasons in a row could force migrations. Entire regions might see families move toward areas with more reliable conditions. These movements contributed to cultural mixing. They also increased pressure on the regions receiving displaced people. Archaeological evidence shows shifts in population density correlated with large eruptions, even when the communities involved lived far from the volcano. Another effect of distant eruptions was the alteration of animal behavior. Migratory animals rely on temperature changes and available food. When the climate cooled unexpectedly, migration patterns changed. Animals moved earlier or later in the season. Some altered their routes entirely. Communities that relied on hunting found it harder to track animals. Those who raised domesticated animals faced difficulties when grazing lands changed. These disruptions affected food supply and required adjustments in daily practices. Some communities near coastlines faced additional challenges. Large eruptions that triggered changes in global temperature influenced sea levels and ocean currents. Cooler temperatures might cause slight drops in sea level or shifts in storm frequency. These changes altered fishing conditions. They also affected the stability of coastal settlements. In some regions, storms became more intense or more frequent, damaging homes and forcing people to relocate. These patterns contributed to the movement of coastal populations throughout ancient history. In written records from later civilizations, there are descriptions of years when the sky remained dim, when the air felt cold, or when the sun appeared weak. Some of these descriptions align with known volcanic eruptions. Others point to events that scientists are still identifying. These written accounts help confirm the scale of ancient eruptions and their long-distance effects. In earlier periods without written records, the same kinds of events influenced communities, but the evidence appears in archaeological layers rather than written text. Sudden changes in diet, shifts in settlement patterns, or alterations in building techniques all reflect major environmental disturbances. The global effects of large eruptions also influence long-term habits. When communities experienced years of poor harvests, they sometimes altered their agricultural methods permanently. They changed planting schedules, introduced crops that tolerated cooler temperatures, or developed new storage techniques to handle potential shortages. These changes indicate that people learned from the disruptions and tried to build resilience into their practices. Although they did not understand the cause of the disruption, they recognized the need to adapt. Climate shifts triggered by volcanic eruptions also influence the spread of technologies. When certain regions experience long-term cooling, people move toward areas with more stable climates. These migrations sometimes brought new skills, tools, or ideas to regions that had not previously used them. For example, pottery styles, stone tools, or farming techniques spread more rapidly during times of environmental stress. This spreading of knowledge contributed to cultural development across wide areas. It also created archaeological traces that show how technologies move through ancient populations. Another important aspect of global volcanic impact is the effect on fire management. When the air became cooler and wetter, natural fires became less frequent in some regions. In others, dry conditions appeared unexpectedly, increasing the risk of wildfires. Communities adapted their strategies to these shifting patterns. They used controlled burns differently. They altered the locations of camps or settlements to avoid dangerous areas. These changes are evident in layers of charcoal found in soil layers. By studying these layers, researchers can identify periods when volcanic activity influenced local fire regimes. Large eruptions also affected the health of communities far away. Ash in the atmosphere can increase respiratory problems, even if the particles are too small to see. Cooler temperatures can weaken immune systems. Food shortages increase vulnerability to illness. These conditions contribute to higher mortality rates. Archaeological studies of burial sites sometimes show increases in deaths during periods associated with major eruptions. These increases do not appear only near the volcano, but also in distant regions where climate conditions were affected. The spread of volcanic particles through the atmosphere sometimes left traces in ice sheets in polar regions. These traces allow researchers to identify the timing and scale of ancient eruptions. When ice cores show multiple layers of volcanic particles in a short period, it suggests a series of eruptions that influenced global climate. Correlating these findings with archaeological evidence helps create a clearer picture of how ancient communities responded to widespread environmental change. In addition to cooling, large eruptions can influence rainfall patterns. Some regions experience increased rainfall due to changes in atmospheric circulation. Others become drier. These changes affect farming, river levels, and the availability of fresh water. Shifts in rainfall can cause floods in one place and drought in another. Communities must adapt quickly to these changes. In archaeological records, this adaptation appears in adjustments to building methods, such as elevated homes and flood-prone areas, or deeper wells in regions experiencing drought. The global echoes of eruptions also affected political structures in later civilizations. In some cases, rulers lost authority when food shortages weakened their ability to support their populations. In other cases, new leaders or groups gained influence by offering solutions to environmental challenges. While this type of political shift is documented in societies with written records, similar patterns likely occurred in earlier periods as well. Environmental stress can accelerate social change, and volcanic eruptions are one of the natural forces capable of causing such stress on a wide scale. Another impact of volcanic-induced climate changes involves the spread of vegetation. Certain plants thrive in cooler conditions while others decline. These changes can alter the availability of food resources for both humans and animals. Communities that relied on particular plants may have had to adjust their diets or migrate to areas where those plants still grew. These shifts in vegetation appear in pollen records found in sediment layers. By comparing pollen layers before and after major eruptions, researchers can see how plant communities responded to climate change. Large volcanic events also affected river systems. Cooler temperatures may reduce the melting rate of mountain snow, causing changes in river flow. Some rivers experience lower water levels, affecting fishing and transportation. Others became more unpredictable, with sudden floods triggered by glacial melting patterns. These changes required communities to adjust their fishing practices, relocate camps, or modify irrigation systems. The remains of these adjustments are visible in ancient canals abandoned fishing sites, and relocated settlements. Although communities far from the eruption site did not understand the cause of these changes, they recognized the need to respond. They developed new strategies, shifted locations, and adapted their daily routines. Their resilience helped them survive periods when the environment behaved unpredictably. The archaeological record shows that communities capable of adapting quickly were more likely to persist through major climate disruptions. As researchers continue to study global climate patterns, they uncover more evidence connecting ancient societal changes to volcanic events. These findings help explain why certain regions experienced sudden shifts in population or cultural development. They also highlight the interconnectedness of ancient communities, even when they had no direct contact. The effects of volcanic eruptions spread through the atmosphere, influencing environments far beyond the reach of the actual lava or ashfall. Evidence from ancient eruptions does not arrive in a single form or from a single place. It surfaces in pieces scattered across layers of rock, in bones left behind by people and animals, and in the stories that survived through oral tradition long before writing appeared. Each type of evidence adds something different. Rock layers show the physical sequence of events. Bones reveal what happened to the people, animals, and ecosystems caught in those events. Stories, even when shaped by generations of retelling, preserve fragments of experience that align with what researchers discover in the ground. When assembled carefully, these clues provide a more complete understanding of how volcanoes shaped human history. They help explain how people lived, how they adapted, and how they remembered what happened to them. The starting point for many discoveries is the land itself. Volcanic layers act as time markers that help researchers organize events in chronological order. When a volcano erupts, the ashen rocket produces settle in distinct layers, each representing a moment in time. Thicker layers mark larger eruptions. Thin layers mark smaller events or distant fallout. Geologists identify these layers through their texture, chemical composition, and the materials they contain. Once identified, the layers become tools for comparison. They connect events across different regions and help trace the spread of ash through the landscape. Rock layers also contain evidence of how quickly the environment changed during an eruption. The presence of crushed vegetation, mixed sediments, or collapsed structures in the lower layers shows the immediate impact. Higher layers reveal the long-term effects, such as changes in slope stability or the formation of new surfaces. By studying these details, researchers reconstruct the moments during and after the eruption. They determine how fast the ash fell, how far the lava traveled, and how much the land shifted. These details help explain why certain settlements suffered more damage than others, and why some areas remained habitable, while others became unstable. Embedded within these rock layers are clues about daily life. Pieces of pottery, stone tools, fire pits, and building materials appear in the layers beneath or within volcanic deposits. These artifacts reveal how people lived before the eruption. Their presence in certain layers also indicates the moment when the eruption interrupted daily routines. For instance, a cluster of tools found beneath a layer of ash suggests that workers left the area quickly, abandoning their tasks. The orientation of collapsed buildings shows how the ground moved. The placement of items within homes reveals how people organized their living. These small details help researchers build a picture of life that existed before the landscape changed. Bones add another dimension to this picture. Animal bones found beneath volcanic layers show what species lived in the region and how they were affected by environmental changes. Burned or scattered bones might indicate that animals fled during the eruption, or that fires caused by volcanic activity reached their shelters. In some cases, bones show evidence of butchering, suggesting that people continued normal activities until the eruption forced them to leave. Bones from domesticated animals reflect how people manage their herds. Bones from wild animals reveal which species were hunted and how their population shifted after the eruption. Human remains are less common because many communities had time to escape. However, when human bones do appear, they offer profound insight into how people responded to the disaster. The position of bodies can indicate whether individuals were fleeing, sheltering, or caught by surprise. The condition of bones reveals age, health, injuries, and signs of physical labor. These details help researchers understand not only how people died during an eruption, but how they lived in the years before it. They show the physical demands of daily tasks, the structure of communities, and the health challenges people faced. The bones of smaller creatures also offer valuable information. Rodent remains preserved in ash layers reveal how animal populations responded to environmental changes. Birds that nested in the area may have left traces that show seasonal patterns. Insects trapped in ash provide clues about temperature, humidity, and vegetation. These details allow researchers to reconstruct the full ecosystem before and after the eruption. Understanding these ecosystems is crucial for interpreting how people adapted to long-term environmental shifts. Rock and bone represent the physical records of ancient eruptions. Whispered legends, however, represent the human memory of those events. These stories were not recorded in writing for many thousands of years, but they survived through repeated telling. They describe unusual darkness in the sky, loud noises from the ground, rivers that changed course, or mountains that released fire. Many of these descriptions match what would occur during a volcanic eruption, but the people telling the stories did not interpret them in geological terms. They described what they saw and felt. Over generations, these descriptions evolved into narratives that explained why the events occurred, who was affected, and what lessons the community needed to remember. These stories often served a practical purpose. They warned listeners about signs to watch for, such as strange noises, changes in water color, unusual animal behavior, or sudden warmth in the ground. Communities used these stories to prepare for future eruptions, even if they did not fully understand the underlying mechanisms. For example, a story about a mountain breathing may have originated from observations of gas emissions. A tale about a river stopping might reflect a landslide caused by an eruption. When researchers compare these stories with geological evidence, the connections become clearer. Oral traditions also reveal information about migrations triggered by eruptions. Some legends describe people leaving their homes and crossing long distances to settle elsewhere. These stories often focus on the journey rather than the cause, but the sequence of events align with periods of volcanic disruption. Archaeological evidence supports this. Layers of ash appear in regions abandoned around the same time new settlements appear in other locations. The combination of story and material evidence helps researchers understand the movement of ancient populations. Another type of clue found in rock and legend involves the rebuilding of communities. Some stories speak of people returning to their homeland long after an eruption, only to find the land unrecognizable. These accounts match geological patterns, where valleys collapsed, lakes formed, or forests vanished. The stories describe new paths through the land, new fields for farming, or new sources of water. Archaeological evidence supports these accounts by showing how settlements re-emerged in different locations following eruptions. Together, the stories and physical traces illustrate how people adapted their habits and rebuilt their communities. Legend also contributes to the understanding of cultural practices shaped by volcanic landscapes. Some stories describe mountains as places of caution, but also sources of stability. These stories reflect the dual nature of volcanic regions. The land was fertile, but dangerous. Communities relied on the resources the volcano provided, but they also remembered the risks. This dual perspective appears in archaeological evidence. Settlements near volcanoes show signs of long-term occupation, punctuated by sudden abandonment. The stories preserve the memory of those disruptions. In regions where multiple eruptions occurred over centuries, legends may contain references to different events merged into a single narrative. These merge stories show how communities interpreted long-term environmental patterns. They reveal which aspects of eruptions left the strongest impression. They also help researchers identify which events happened close together or had widespread effects. When combined with rock layers and archaeological data, these stories help refine the timeline of ancient volcanic activity. Not all stories reflect direct memory of eruptions. Some incorporate symbolic elements that serve social or cultural functions. However, even symbolic elements often have roots in real experiences. When legends mention unending darkness, choking air, floods of hot material, or thunder from inside the earth, these details mirror volcanic phenomena. Researchers separate symbolic interpretation from physical description by comparing the stories to geological evidence. When the two align, the stories offer valuable insight into the human experience of eruptions. Bones and artifacts discovered within volcanic layers also help interpret the legends. For example, a story about a large animal disappearing from the land may align with bones, indicating a species' decline after an eruption. A story about fields turning to stone may reflect lava flows covering agricultural areas. The stories do not describe these events in scientific terms, but they preserve the memory of how the land changed. When the physical evidence matches the descriptions, it suggests that the legend reflects a real event experienced by ancestors. Rock layers also reveal smaller-scale events that might not appear in legends. Minor eruptions, gas releases, and seismic activity leave traces in soil and sediment. These events may have disrupted daily life without causing widespread damage. They may appear in stories as warnings or strange occurrences. By comparing these clues, researchers understand not only the catastrophic events, but also the minor disruptions that shaped daily behavior. Another source of evidence comes from the chemical signatures within volcanic layers. The composition of ash reveals which volcano erupted and how powerful the event was. These signatures appear in ice cores, ocean sediments, and distant regions. When researchers match these signatures with archaeological and legendary evidence, they form a global picture of how eruptions influence different communities. A story from one region might align with ash found thousands of kilometers away. This connection shows how widespread the effects of a single eruption could be. Bones found in different layers also help track recovery patterns. After an eruption, some animal populations decline while others thrive in the new environment. These changes reveal how ecosystems responded. This information helps researchers understand how people adapted their hunting or farming practices. For example, if a species used for food became scarce, people might shift to new sources or relocate to areas with more reliable resources. These shifts appear in both the archaeological record and in the changes seen in ancient stories. Human bones provide another layer of detail. Changes in bone composition reveal shifts in diet. If crops failed after an eruption, people may have relied more on wild foods or stored grains. Evidence of malnutrition or stress appears in the bones. These physical signs align with stories describing hard seasons, challenging journeys, or the need to seek help from neighboring communities. When these different sources of information match, they offer a more complete view of the community's experience. Rocks, bones, and stories all contribute to the understanding of how ancient people interpreted eruptions. None of these sources alone provides the full picture. Rocks show what happened to the land. Bones show what happened to the people and the animals. Legends show how the experience was remembered and passed down. Together, they reveal the long-term influence of volcanic activity on human history. Most natural forces change the world gradually, shifting landscapes little by little over long periods of time. Volcanoes do the opposite. They can alter entire regions in days or even hours. Yet once the immediate destruction fades, the same forces that erased forests, settlements, and coastlines also build new land, enrich soil, and create environments that future communities depend on. This cycle of destruction followed by renewal is fundamental to volcanic regions. The people who lived near these mountains thousands of years ago did not describe it in scientific terms, but they witnessed the changes directly. What they saw reshaped their routines, their settlements, and in many cases, the direction of their culture. To understand this cycle, it helps to begin with what an eruption removes. When a volcano releases lava, ash, and gases, the first impact is on the surrounding environment. Forests burn or collapse under the weight of ash. Rivers become choked with sediment and change course. Lakes drain or fill, depending on where the lava settles. Farmlands disappear beneath black rock or gray ash. Homes and storage areas vanish. Footpaths that had existed for generations become buried. The immediate result is a landscape that no longer resembles the one people relied on. For ancient communities, this meant that everything from food gathering to travel routes had to be reconsidered. Dense forests near volcanoes often suffered the most. Trees that once stood for centuries could vanish quickly under intense heat or heavy ash fall. In some cases, the trunks fell and fossilized beneath volcanic material. In others, the trees burned where they stood, leaving behind hollow molds in hardened lava. These changes had consequences for people who depended on the forest for timber, plants, and game. Without the forest, hunting became more difficult. Construction materials were harder to find. Foraging patterns had to shift. Communities responded by relocating or by adjusting their daily tasks to the new conditions. Rivers also changed dramatically. When ash and debris entered the water, the flow became unpredictable. Some rivers overflowed, creating temporary floods. Others were diverted when lava created new barriers. Freshwater sources could become temporarily unsafe. Ancient people noticed these changes immediately because they influenced survival. A river that once provided consistent water might become too muddy or acidic. Fishing grounds might disappear. Travel routes that followed the riverbanks might become dangerous. These disruptions forced communities to adapt quickly. The destruction extended to farmland. Fields carefully tended for many seasons could be buried beneath new layers of ash. While this made the land unusable in the short term, the ash eventually broke down and enriched the soil. This long-term benefit was not immediately helpful to the people who lived through the eruption. They had to find temporary food sources and relocate their farming efforts. Some communities abandoned the area for generations. When descendants returned centuries later, they often found the soil unusually fertile. This return pattern appears repeatedly in archaeological records. Entire coastlines also changed. Large eruptions near the ocean could cause volcanic islands to collapse or expand. When large amounts of volcanic material entered the sea, the coastline shifted outward. In other cases, the collapse of part of a volcanic island caused waves that destroyed coastal settlements. These sudden changes left behind underwater ruins or buried harbor structures. The loss of coastal access influenced trade patterns and forced communities to rebuild in new locations. Archaeologists studying these regions find evidence of ports that once handled significant activity, but vanished after volcanic events. Lava flows created another set of transformations. As molten rock cooled, it hardened into new surfaces that could last for thousands of years. These surfaces reshaped travel patterns. A valley that once allowed easy passage might become a rugged field of sharp lava. Paths had to be cleared or rerouted around the hardened rock. Over time, people learned to navigate these new surfaces. They created trails through cooled lava fields and used the stable ground to build new structures. This adaptation shows how quickly communities incorporated volcanic changes into their daily routines. One of the most dramatic effects of volcanic activity involved the creation of new land. When lava flows into the sea, it cools rapidly and forms rock, expanding coastlines. When repeated eruptions add layer upon layer of rock and ash, they slowly build mountains, plateaus, and islands. The people who lived near volcanoes thousands of years ago would have seen new land forming within their lifetimes. Although they did not track the process scientifically, they recognized that the volcano added as well as removed land. This dual nature influenced how they viewed the mountain, not simply as a destroyer, but as a force that shaped their environment in ways that could provide long-term benefits. New land often created opportunities. Fresh surfaces free of vegetation eventually became fertile areas. Ash-rich soil supported vigorous plant growth once it weathered. Communities discovered that farming on volcanic soil produced strong crops. This encouraged people to resettle regions previously devastated by eruptions. The cycle of destruction, followed by fertility, explains why ancient people continue to live near volcanoes despite the risks. The benefits of the land outweighed the dangers, especially after generations of adaptation. Volcanic activity also produced natural features that people used for shelter or storage. Lava tubes formed tunnels beneath the surface when molten lava drained from channels. These tubes provided stable interior spaces that remained cool in warm seasons and warm in cold seasons. People used them for storage, temporary shelter, and sometimes even long-term habitation. These underground spaces protected items from weather, animals, and ashfall. Archaeological evidence from lava tubes shows preserved tools, footprints, and hearths used by ancient people who took advantage of these sheltered environments. Another example of creation involves geothermal areas. After eruptions, some regions developed hot springs, steam vents, or warm ground. Ancient people learned to use these features. They cooked food using geothermal heat, softened materials for tool making, and sometimes used warm ground for drying or preserving food. These features also influence settlement patterns. People often built homes near warm areas to take advantage of natural heating during colder seasons. These adaptations reveal a practical understanding of volcanic landscapes. Lava also produced durable building materials. Hardened lava rock could be shaped into tools used in construction or employed as paving stones. Obsidian, formed when lava cools quickly, became one of the sharpest natural materials available. Early communities used it for cutting tools, arrowheads, and ceremonial objects. The presence of obsidian does not indicate destruction, but creation. It shows how volcanic processes provided resources that improve the quality of tools and technology in surrounding regions. Trade networks formed to distribute obsidian across long distances, connecting communities that otherwise might not have interacted. The creation of new landscapes also influenced the availability of natural resources. Some eruptions exposed mineral deposits previously hidden beneath the surface. These minerals included metals used for tools or decorative objects. When ancient people discovered these new resources, they incorporated them into their technologies. This discovery process contributed to long-term cultural development. The availability of new materials changed the shape of tools, the style of ornaments, and even the structure of early trade systems. The same eruptions that created new land occasionally formed natural barriers. Lava flows formed ridges that redirected wind patterns, water flow, and animal movement. These barriers influenced where people built settlements, where animals migrated, and where farms could be located. Communities adjusted their activities based on the new geography. These adjustments appear in the archaeological record as changes in settlement layout, new paths carved into the land, and shifts in farming practices. Calderas, large depressions formed after major eruptions, also became significant new environments. When calderas filled with water, they created lakes that attracted wildlife and eventually supported human occupation. Over centuries, these lakes provided fish, reeds, and other resources. Settlements grew along their edges. The land inside the caldera often became fertile due to long-term accumulation of sediment. These environments did not exist before the eruption. They represent entirely new worlds created by volcanic activity. Some calderas remained dry, forming broad basins where people could gather, build, or farm. These basins provided flat land, surrounded by protective walls of rock. The unique shape influenced wind patterns and temperatures, creating microclimates. Communities used these areas creatively, adapting to the new conditions. The emergence of caldera basins provides further evidence that eruptions reshape the environment in ways that could support life rather than simply disrupt it. Volcanoes also contributed to long-term soil development. Ash contains minerals that support plant growth when broken down. Over centuries, repeated ashfall created deep, nutrient-rich soil. This soil supported dense forests and robust agricultural systems. Many volcanic regions today are centers of farming because the soil retains moisture, supports diverse crops, and replenishes nutrients over time. Ancient people recognized this fertility. They returned to volcanic regions after eruptions, not out of ignorance of the risks, but because they understood the long-term advantages. New animal habitats emerged as well. Lava fields, though initially barren, became homes for species adapted to the rugged terrain. These species entered the food chain and influenced hunting patterns. In the long term, the new habitats enriched biodiversity. Human communities adjusted by developing new hunting techniques or by domesticating animals suited to the new environment. For example, goats and sheep adapted well to rocky slopes created by volcanic flows. Their presence supported early pastoral communities. Even the aftermath of destruction led to new cultural developments. When communities rebuilt after an eruption, they often changed their settlement layouts. They experimented with new building techniques to withstand ashfall or seismic activity. They altered water management systems to deal with rivers influenced by volcanic deposits. These changes contributed to the development of engineering knowledge. Over generations, this accumulated knowledge became part of the cultural identity of people who lived near volcanoes. The interplay between destruction and creation also influenced social systems. Some communities developed seasonal movement patterns that reduced risk. Others created storage systems capable of holding food for longer periods in case an eruption disrupted farming. Some groups formed alliances with neighboring communities to share resources during difficult times. These social adaptations strengthened networks and contributed to the survival of groups living in volatile regions. In regions where repeated eruptions occurred, cultural memory developed around the cycle of loss and renewal. People passed down the stories of destruction, not solely as warnings, but as explanations for why the land was fertile or why new lakes formed. These stories framed volcanic activity as a natural part of life rather than an unexpected disaster. The stories became part of rituals, customs, and shared identity. Archaeological evidence supports this through repeated rebuilding in the same areas, often with improved structures. As volcanic landscapes evolved, they continued to influence the movement of people. Some regions became hubs for trade because of the resources produced by volcanic activity. Others became isolated due to natural barriers. Some areas grew into important cultural centers. Others remained sparsely populated because the terrain remained too unstable. This variation shaped the distribution of ancient civilizations across entire regions. The changes caused by volcanic activity created opportunities for new societies to form. When a major eruption cleared a region, it sometimes opened space for different groups to settle. These new settlements brought their own traditions, tools, and technologies. Over time, the mix of cultures created unique societies that would not have formed without the earlier destruction. The process of rebuilding contributed to cultural development by encouraging innovation and cooperation. All of these factors show that volcanoes did more than erase worlds. They created new ones. They produced landscapes that supported life in different ways than before. They provided resources that shaped tools, technologies, and customs. They created opportunities for new settlements, new trade systems, and new cultural identities. Ancient people learned to navigate this cycle. They recognized that destruction was temporary and that the land would eventually support life again. As this exploration continues, the next section turns toward an even deeper question: whether the earlier civilizations, long before written history, may have taken shape in these volcanic regions, and whether the first steps toward organized society began in places shaped by fire. The earliest attempts at organized living did not appear suddenly. They began gradually as scattered families or small groups discovered that cooperation made survival more reliable. These early communities formed wherever resources were stable enough to support them. In many regions around the world, the land shaped by volcanoes offered that stability. Even though eruptions brought danger, the periods between major events could last for generations. During those long intervals, the soil remained fertile, the water sources consistent, and the local materials abundant. These conditions encouraged early people to stay, to build, and eventually to develop the foundations of what would later become civilization. One starting point for examining this idea is the role volcanic soil played in supporting early agriculture. Farming required more than planting seeds. It required land rich enough in nutrients to sustain crops through multiple seasons. Volcanic soil provided this advantage. Over time, ash broke down into minerals that supported plant growth. Early people who planted seeds in these regions noticed that crops grew stronger and more consistently than they did in other areas. This reliability meant families could store food, support larger groups, and develop routines that depended on predictable harvests. Stability in food production encouraged settlement rather than constant movement. Another important factor involves the availability of fresh water. Volcanic regions often contain springs, fed by underground systems that emerge from heated rock. These springs provided steady water even during dry seasons. Communities that settled near them had reliable access to drinking water, irrigation, and food preparation. The consistency of these springs helped early groups expand their farming efforts. When food and water remained stable, populations grew. Growing populations required organization. That organization became one of the earlier steps towards structured society. Volcanic landscapes also created natural boundaries. Lava flows, cliffs, ridges, and hardened rock acted as physical markers that defined regions. These boundaries helped early communities establish territories without formal agreements. They also limited conflict because natural features made it difficult to cross into neighboring regions. With less movement between territories, early groups developed their own internal systems more easily. These internal systems eventually formed the roots of cultural practices, early leadership structures, and shared habits that strengthened the group's identity. The presence of geothermal heat offered another advantage. In cold climates, warm ground near volcanic features made certain areas more livable during harsh seasons. Settlements built in these regions required less fuel for heating. People used warm ground for drying food or softening materials. These advantages improved survival rates and allowed communities to remain in one place throughout the year. Year-round settlement contributed to larger and more stable populations. Larger populations made more complex social structures necessary. Trade networks also developed in volcanic regions because these areas produced valuable materials. Obsidian was one of the most widely traded resources in the ancient world, long before written history. Its sharp edges made it ideal for cutting tools, hunting points, and early surgical instruments. Communities living near obsidian-rich volcanoes gained trading power. They exchanged this material for food, clothing, and other goods. These exchanges required coordination, planning, and communication. Over time, this need for interaction contributed to social complexity. Communities that controlled volcanic resources developed early forms of leadership to manage distribution and protect access to materials. Early settlements in volcanic regions also benefited from defensible terrain. Elevated ridges, steep slopes, and naturally enclosed basins made it easier to protect communities from external threats. People recognized that living near these features provided safety. Defensible areas became long-term settlement sites. Long-term sites supported generational knowledge, transfers such as farming techniques, construction methods, and survival strategies. This knowledge created continuity. Continuity became a foundation for organized living. Archaeological evidence from ancient volcanic regions shows early signs of communal planning. Some of the oldest farming terraces appear on volcanic slopes. These terraces required cooperation and coordinated labor. Their construction suggests that early people developed agreements about land use, water distribution, and shared responsibilities. These agreements represent early forms of governance. They were not formal laws, but they showed that people understood the need for rules and organization. Terraces also indicate long-term occupation, as they require maintenance and repeated use over many seasons. Another factor to consider is the pattern of rebuilding after eruptions. Communities that experienced disruption learned how to reconstruct their homes, fields, and storage structures. They developed building techniques suited to volcanic environments. They reinforced walls, positioned homes in safer locations, and created storage systems that protected food from ashfall. These adjustments required planning and cooperation. Over time, the shared experience of rebuilding strengthened the community's identity and encouraged the development of leadership roles. The individuals who understood the landscape best often guided the rebuilding process. Their guidance became a form of early authority. Volcanic environments also encouraged innovation. When eruptions reshaped the land, people had to create new tools, adjust their farming methods, and redesign their settlements. These innovations accumulated over generations. Communities that faced repeated challenges developed a deeper understanding of the land and the resources available. This understanding contributed to early scientific thinking. People observed patterns in the environment, remembered them, and passed the information to others. These early observations formed the foundations of practical knowledge systems. Practical knowledge became one of the essential components of organized societies. In addition to material advantages, volcanic landscapes played a role in shaping early cultural practices. Communities developed stories, rituals, and customs tied to the land. These stories reflected their experiences with eruptions, fertile soil, shifting rivers, and the rhythms of the environment. Cultural practices helped maintain order within the group. They provided explanations for natural events and reinforced shared identity. Even though these practices were not part of formal civilizations, they contributed to the stability of early communities. Stability paved the way for more structured societies. There is also evidence that some early ceremonial sites were built in volcanic regions. These sites show deliberate construction and planning. Structures were aligned with natural features, water sources, or elevated ground. The coordination required to build such sites indicates a level of organization beyond basic survival. People gathered for rituals, decision M, or community events. These gatherings strengthened social ties. Strong social ties contributed to the emergence of leadership, shared responsibilities, and early governance. When populations grew in volcanic areas, trade became more structured. Exchange of goods required defined meeting places, transport routes, and agreements on value. These elements laid the groundwork for early economic systems. Volcanic regions often sat at crossroads because people traveled through them to reach fertile valleys or water sources. As more groups interacted, shared languages developed. Shared language contributed further to social organization. Over time, these elements helped transform simple communities into early complex societies. Another important consideration is that volcanic regions often contain diverse environments in close proximity. There were forests, rivers, fertile plains, rocky slopes, and geothermal areas. This diversity supported a wide range of food sources. People could hunt, gather, fish, and farm within a relatively small area. This variety reduced the need for long migrations. When communities remained in one region for long periods, social structures became more complex. Families developed specialized roles. Skilled individuals took responsibility for tasks such as tool making, construction, or water management. Specialization is a hallmark of early civilizations and appears in regions with volcanic landscapes. The process of adapting to eruptions also encouraged long-term thinking. Communities had to plan beyond a single season. They stored food, repaired structures, and monitored land stability. They passed down knowledge about safer places to build, signs of danger, and effective evacuation routes. This planning required communication across generations. Generational communication created continuity and preserved important knowledge. Continuity supported the development of culture, leadership, and shared values, all essential components of early civilization. Archaeological discoveries support the idea that early centers of organized life developed near volcanoes. Settlements found beneath ash layers show signs of long-term occupation. Fertile fields appear in layers that developed after earlier eruptions. Tools made from volcanic materials appear in regions far from the source, indicating early trade networks. Buried pathways show consistent movement patterns across volatile landscapes. These patterns reflect organized living before written records existed. Volcanic disruptions also contributed to social merging. When eruptions forced communities to flee, they sometimes joined other groups. These merges brought new skills, technologies, and cultural practices. The combination of different groups accelerated the development of complex societies. Archaeological evidence of mixed artifacts in volcanic regions supports this idea. Items from different traditions appeared together in layers following eruptions. This blending of cultures contributed to the formation of early civilizations. In places where eruptions were infrequent but powerful, communities benefited from centuries of stable conditions. During these long, stable periods, populations grew, technology advanced, and social structures became more complex. When the next eruption occurred, it often reshaped the civilization's trajectory. Some groups rebuilt and continued in the same region. Others relocated permanently and carried their knowledge elsewhere. These relocations spread cultural practices across wide regions. The spread of knowledge is one of the key drivers of early civilization formation. Some volcanic regions also supported the earliest forms of large-scale cooperation. Shared irrigation systems, defensive structures, and community storage facilities required collective effort. These projects strengthened social bonds and encouraged the development of roles and responsibilities. Cooperation also reduced the impact of environmental challenges. Communities that cooperated survived better than those that operated independently. The ability to cooperate at a large scale is a defining feature of civilization, and volcanic regions provided conditions that encouraged it. In addition to environmental advantages, volcanic landscapes inspired early explanations for the natural world. People observed fire emerging from the ground, rivers changing direction, and the sky darkening. They developed explanations based on observation and experience. These explanations formed early belief systems. Belief systems helped communities stay united. They reinforced shared values and provided guidance during difficult periods. Shared beliefs were another factor that encouraged the development of civilization. As research continues, evidence increasingly suggests that some of the earliest organized societies emerged in regions shaped by volcanic activity. While volcanoes created challenges, they also created opportunities. The people who lived in these environments learned to use the land to their advantage. They developed farming systems, trading networks, social structures, and cultural identities rooted in the landscape. These developments contributed to the rise of early civilization. Many landscapes across the world contain traces of events that happened long before any written record. Volcanic regions hold some of the richest archives of this kind. Even when the surface appears quiet, the layers beneath contain details about people, plants, animals, climate, and countless moments of human adaptation. These mountains, which once reshaped entire environments in sudden bursts of activity, carry evidence inside their rock, ash, and collapsed formations. Researchers who examine these details often find themselves uncovering clues that connect directly to the lives of early people who once moved across the slopes, harvested nearby fields, gathered water from springs, or rebuilt their settlements after eruptions. To understand how these mountains preserve so much information, it helps to consider the way volcanic layers accumulate. Each eruption adds material to the surface. Lava creates thick, dense layers. Ash creates fine blankets that spread over wide distances. Gravel-like fragments fill gaps in the landscape. Over time, rain, wind, and erosion shift some of this material, but much of it remains intact beneath later deposits. Archaeologists studying these layers find that they behave like pages in a long history book. Each layer contains evidence of what happened just before or during the eruption. The deeper the layer, the older the story. Within these layers are artifacts that people left behind. Some items were dropped accidentally, others were buried intentionally. The combination of volcanic burial and geological pressure often protects these artifacts from weathering. Stone tools retain their edges. Pottery fragments remain recognizable. Seeds and plant sometimes remain intact due to rapid burial. These materials reveal what people ate, what tools they used, how they stored food, and how they organized their living spaces. When these items appear alongside volcanic deposits, they form a timeline that helps researchers understand how people responded to environmental changes. The shape of volcanic landscapes also influences what remains preserved. Lava flows can trap organic material beneath them, creating carbonized remains that survive for thousands of years. Fallen trees become charcoal. Food remains become preserved impressions. The presence of these materials reveals what the environment looked like before the eruption. It shows what species grew near the settlement, how dense the forests were, and what resources were available. Communities that depended on nearby forests, for example, left behind evidence of hunting patterns and tree use. Communities that relied more on farming left behind fields and irrigation structures preserved beneath volcanic material. Another important source of information comes from the way structures collapse during eruptions. Buildings made of stone or clay react differently depending on the type of volcanic activity. Rapid asheville may collapse roofs but leave walls standing. Lava flows may surround buildings and preserve their shapes in hardened rock. Pyrolastic flows may flatten entire settlements, leaving behind a molded outline of what once existed. These outlines show where people built their homes, how large their living areas were, and how they arranged their daily spaces. When researchers identify repeated patterns, they learn how communities organized themselves and how they shared tasks. Material evidence represents only part of what volcanoes preserve. Some mountains contain deep layers that record climate changes. Ash particles reflect the composition of the atmosphere at the time of an eruption. Chemical signatures stored in rock let scientists reconstruct the temperature, humidity, and air composition. When these findings match information from ice cores or sediment layers, far from the volcano, they help confirm global climate patterns. Understanding these patterns provides insight into how early communities adapted to changing conditions. Volcanic lakes formed after large eruptions also act as long-term storage sites. Sediment settles at the bottom of the lake, year after year, in thin layers. These layers trap pollen, plant fragments, insect remains, and dust. By examining these layers, researchers reconstruct the local environment through different periods. They identify which plants grew near the lake, when forests expanded or retreated, and how rainfall fluctuated. This information shows how the land changed after eruptions and how long it took for ecosystems to recover. The recovery patterns help researchers understand how ancient communities timed their return to abandoned regions. Some volcanic slopes preserve footprints from people and animals who walked across fresh surfaces before they fully hardened. These footprints remain unchanged for thousands of years. Their spacing reveals walking speed. Their depth shows the weight of individuals and the softness of the ground. Footprints belonging to groups reveal the size of families or the direction of migration. Tracks belonging to animals reveal which species inhabited the region and how they move through the landscape. These preserved moments allow researchers to imagine the movements of early people directly. Caves and lava tubes add another dimension to the record. These underground spaces sometimes contain items untouched by weather. Early people used them for temporary shelter or storage. The items found inside include tools, cooking stones, animal bones, and simple containers. These materials provide a direct window into daily activities. The absence of ash inside deep caves often means that items remained undisturbed through multiple eruptions. When researchers compare items found inside these tubes with those found in open-air settlements, buried by ash, they can see what people prioritized during evacuations and what tasks they performed inside protected spaces. The edges of volcanic fields also reveal patterns of movement. As communities returned to the land after long periods, they created new paths across the cooled surfaces. These paths sometimes appear as shallow grooves carved into rock by repeated footsteps. Over time, they became well-defined routes. The presence of these paths reveals how people navigated the new terrain. It shows where they traveled for water, food, or trade. When these paths intersect with preserved footprints or settlements, researchers gain a clearer understanding of how the landscape influenced human behavior. Beyond physical evidence, volcanoes preserve remnants of ancient rituals and traditions. In some areas, early people placed offerings near volcanic vents or on elevated ridges. These offerings include shaped stones, carved objects, seeds, or animal remains. Their placement indicates belief systems tied to the environment. The rituals appear to acknowledge the mountain, perhaps in response to eruptions or in gratitude for fertile soil. These findings show how deeply connected communities were to the land. The volcano was not simply a geological feature. It influenced cultural identity, seasonal routines, and generational teaching. The presence of repeated offerings in certain locations shows long-term occupation. It suggests that generations of people return to the same places. The consistency of ritual materials reveals continuity within the community. These traditions show that people develop systems of meaning that help them interpret the unpredictable landscape. These systems contributed to social stability, which in turn helped communities thrive, even in regions shaped by volcanic activity. Legends connected to these regions, though shaped over centuries, also preserve fragments of real events. When stories describe long nights, unusual heat, falling debris, or shifting land, these descriptions align with volcanic phenomena. While the stories do not use scientific language, they contain accurate observations. These observations often match physical evidence found in rock layers or archaeological deposits. When researchers compare these stories with geological data, the alignment strengthens the understanding of how early people interpreted eruptions. Some legends describe the disappearance of entire landscapes. These stories might mention valleys swallowed by the earth, fields turned to stone, or rivers that stopped flowing. These descriptions reflect the effects of large eruptions. Calderas, formed from collapsed magma chambers, match descriptions of land falling inward. Lava flows covering fields match descriptions of ground turning solid. Landslides triggered by eruptions match stories of rivers blocked by strange new barriers. The consistency between legend and geological evidence shows that remembered experiences contributed to cultural narratives. Other legends describe migrations. These stories often focus on long journeys, difficult terrain, or new settlements. Archaeological evidence supports these narratives. Layers of ash found in abandoned regions correlate with new settlement layers in safer areas. The timing of these movements reflects the need to escape eruptions or unstable landscapes. The blend of story and physical evidence helps researchers reconstruct migration patterns that occurred long before writing. While much of the evidence buried in volcanic regions reveals disruptions, it also reveals resilience. Communities rebuilt repeatedly. They learned from earlier experiences. They improved their building methods. They adjusted farming techniques to new soil conditions. They identified safer places to settle. They established storage systems that protected food from ash. These practices became part of community knowledge passed down through generations. The consistency of these adaptations across different volcanic regions suggests that early people learned similar lessons from similar challenges. The preservation of construction techniques provides further insight. In some regions, early builders created stone foundations designed to withstand ground movement. They built walls using interlocking stones. They reinforced roofs with thicker beams or built structures partly underground to protect against ash. These architectural choices show that people did not rebuild blindly after eruptions. They used what they observed to make stronger homes. These improvements reveal an early form of engineering shaped directly by volcanic activity. Agricultural practices also adapted. After eruptions, the land often became more fertile, once ashathered. People learned to take advantage of this. They planted crops that grew well in volcanic soil. They created terraces to prevent erosion on slopes. They adjusted planting schedules to match new weather patterns left by atmospheric changes. These adjustments show that volcanic activity influenced the development of early agriculture. Farming practices refined in volcanic regions later spread to other areas carried by migrating families or trade networks. Trade developments linked volcanic regions to distant areas. Obsidian tools traveled far from their sources, indicating that early communities valued volcanic materials highly. These trade networks encouraged communication between groups. They spread knowledge, technology, and cultural practices. Trade required organization and cooperation. These elements contributed to the gradual development of more complex societies. The presence of volcanic material in distant settlements shows how far-reaching these networks became. Mountains that once produced destruction thus became silent carriers of information. Every layer of ash, every lava flow, every collapsed slope holds a record of events that shaped cultures, migrations, and early systems of organization. These records remain even when the stories fade or when modern landscapes make ancient environments unrecognizable. Through careful study, researchers uncover connections between past and present. They find evidence of how people responded to challenges, how they rebuilt their lives, and how they learned to understand a landscape that could shift at any moment. One of the most significant insights drawn from these preserved records is the repeated pattern of return. Even after major eruptions, communities eventually came back. They returned not because they overlooked the danger, but because the land offered long-term advantages. The soil provided strong harvests. The water sources remained reliable. The landscape supported diverse food sources. People understood these benefits and considered them worth the risk. Their repeated return shows not only resilience, but a deep understanding of their environment. Volcanic regions also served as crossroads for early cultural exchange. The presence of valuable resources, fertile land, and defensible terrain drew groups from multiple directions. When these groups interacted, they exchanged ideas, tools, and practices. These exchanges contributed to the formation of early social systems. Some of the earliest examples of structured living appear in regions shaped by volcanic activity. These areas provided the stability needed for innovation and the challenges needed for adaptation. Modern researchers continue to uncover new evidence in these landscapes. Advanced imaging techniques reveal buried structures beneath hardened labor. Sediment analysis identifies plants that vanished long ago. Chemical studies of ash layers link eruptions across continents. Each discovery adds new context to the long story held within the mountains. These mountains have waited quietly, their slopes covered in vegetation or carved by wind, while the evidence inside remained intact. As more discoveries emerge, the understanding of early human life deepens. The mountains show that early people were observant, adaptable, and resourceful. They learned from their environment and passed down knowledge that helped their descendants navigate difficult conditions. They built structures suited to the land, developed tools from available materials, and created systems of cooperation that supported survival. These patterns reveal the foundational steps that eventually led to the rise of civilizations. Even now, the mountains continue to shape human lives. People visit volcanic regions to study their history, gather resources, or observe geological activity. Researchers examine rock layers to reconstruct ancient events. Communities living near volcanoes today rely on early warning systems informed by lessons drawn from ancient eruptions. The connection between people and volcanic landscapes persists. The mountains still influence farming, water systems, and settlement patterns. They remain both a challenge and an opportunity, just as they were thousands of years ago. The deeper researchers look into these regions, the more connections they find between ancient experiences and modern understanding. The mountains carry records that extend far beyond the reach of human memory. They hold details that help explain how early people organized themselves, how they adapted to extreme environments, and how they built the foundations of structured living. And so the slopes, ridges, and valleys shaped by fire continue to hold their stories. They remain as steady reminders of the long relationship between people and the land. They contain the evidence that fills the gaps left by lost settlements, forgotten paths, and faded legends. With every new discovery, the picture grows clearer, showing how early communities lived at the edge of unpredictable forces and how those forces played a role in the formation of human society.